The scientific revolution starts now.
The Demystify broadcast.
Let us see in the dark. Good morning. Hello.
Good morning. Great to see you, Shilo.
Yeah, good to see you too. You'll have to forgive me if I'm sort of still waking up.
Oh, no worries. How'd you get hooked up with the sex museum to begin with? What was your connection there?
I guess they just saw one of our podcasts. Was it Diana Pasico?
Mm-hmm.
Did you catch that one by any chance, or do you know Diana?
I don't remember.
Okay,
it's been a while. I met a bunch of them, but I'd have to see their faces. I wouldn't remember their names at this point.
So Diana's she's a professor of religious studies, and she's.
Oh no, I didn't meet her.
Yeah, she's got this. We've had her on the podcast, I guess, and I think that's what I was actually asking. If you have.
Oh, I thought you were asking. I thought she was a person at the Museum of Sex, so I apologize.
No,
so that was your guest. Yeah.
Yeah. They saw that podcast, and she's an interesting character because she tries to understand the UFO phenomena through a wider historical lens, one that views it as this persistent phenomenon, and she ties it into religious, visions, I guess. And so she has a pretty interesting perspective, and she's friends with a lot of people inside of the, alternative UAP investigation world. Gary Nolan, who's the Stanford professor who claims to have little pieces of craft.
But they saw our conversation with her as part of their research for the exhibit that they're trying to put on, and they reached out to us. And honestly, I think in part they reached out to us as part of a larger campaign, but most people didn't get back to them because I feel like the Museum of Sex is a slightly alienating venue. And I feel like aliens are already an alienating venue. And so when you combine aliens and the Museum of Sex, people are like, I want nothing to do with that. I'm terrified of what that would do. And so it's been
the play. I haven't been there in a little while, but when I was there, it was very well run. It was nice. They put a lot of effort. I mean, it looked very high end. All the stuff they did was solid. But that's why I agreed to do it there, is because they seemed on the ball. So I don't know if they still are, but yeah, I was very impressed with their just management of the whole place back then.
I think that they are. I think that it's just literally the topic of sex just freaks people out deeply. I mean, you must have experienced that a ton when you were writing.
Yeah, Saigadam, who I wrote Journey of the Mind with, we also wrote Billion Wicked Thoughts, our book about sex, together. Yeah, we had mobs attacking us. It was my first time, having mobs and death threats and all that sort of stuff. My introduction. I mean, fortunately, it was before.
Wait! Where were these mobs attacking you?
So, this must have been 2008. So right as social media was coming into, like, Twitter didn't exist yet when we started. Instagram didn't exist. It was Facebook and LiveJournal. So LiveJournal was actually the thing that gave us the most trouble back then. So we were researching sex. So we gathered up. Actually, I could talk about this. I guess this isn't entirely appropriate for your show. So we gathered up all the data, all the online data. I can't even tell you. We got massive, massive data, all the data. And we were super duper lucky because we did our research in this window of time, a super duper special window of time, the only window where you could see both the original business model of delivering sex on the internet was subscription sites. So when we did our research, they all existed. There was tens of thousands of them. And a lot of them were just mom and pop. Here's my sexual interest. I'm going to try to monetize it. You have to pay a monthly fee. So that made it very easy to study interest. Like we could see the traffic to different sites. We could see how much money was spent on different sites. But then the tube sites were also starting. Like Pornhub is the big one, RedTube, places like that. So we had access to both. Now it's just the tube sites, and now the tube sites, they're all corporate, owned by multinational corporations. They've all consolidated. There's only a handful of players now controlling like 80% of the pornography across the planet, and it's all homogenized. This is the other thing. When we did our research, we were looking at human sexuality in the raw for the very last time. Human sexuality from now on is globalized. It's homogenized across the planet. People are being turned on in Japan and Saudi Arabia and Brazil were all looking at the same erotic content now. That was not the case at the beginning, but just both corporate effects and other information effects of consolidation has resulted in like a global sexuality, which means, the sexuality of our kids and our grandkids is going to be very strange to us. It won't be recognizable.
Were people
to us
mobbing you
today.
because they just didn't want to see sex being discussed in the
So
open? Or what happened?
we went everywhere. So my point was we went everywhere to get data, porn sites, Google hubs, traffic companies, but we also went to fan fiction sites. So fan fiction was a source of female sexuality, brand new at the time. And so we got involved in some online fan fiction communities. And one of them decided that we were saying that men and women sexually are different, which the evidence overwhelmingly supports this fact. And so there was someone who thought, it's all cultural, blank slate, men and women's sexuality is only different because society tells us it's different. And so she started organizing like protests against us. It was strange. And she convinced all the fan fiction people that we were up to no good, that we were scheming and had plans to turn their data to use it against them, to mock them or say bad things about women.
So they were afraid that because you observed differences between men and women, that you were saying that men and women were somehow not equal human beings or something?
Yes, it was a political thing. They thought we were saying like that we were saying men and women are born different sexually, and our sexual tastes are different, and let's study these differences. And the initial ones felt that this is not true. We're promoting, this bad idea. And
so they thought that men and women aren't born differently. I don't understand.
Right. I mean,
their brains aren't born.
It's a pretty common perspective.
Feminism.
I don't understand.
That was the mainstream view of feminism until very recently.
Sometimes I can't tell if Shiloh's trolling me or if he's genuinely perplexed. Are you trolling?
I don't know. Maybe I'm looking at this from an alien perspective. I want to make sure I understand what's going on here. You mean they're trying to say that men and women are equal, right? In terms of their humanity and their abilities and their intellectual power.
I think it goes one deeper.
It started, feminism until very recently, the mainstream conventional view of feminism is that, our sexuality is influenced entirely by how we're socialized. And so it's cultural. It's our culture that makes men and women's, erotic taste different. If we were in a different culture, our erotic taste would be entirely different. So we had the data for the first time in human science history to show that, we looked at millions of people in every country across the planet. We had like 1 billion different sexual data on 1 billion different individuals from across the planet. And so we could say very clearly men and women in every single country, in every culture, are different and different in the exact same way. Fan fiction, for example, was popular in every country. The same fan fiction. Women are interested in fan fiction in every country. Like that alone was very fascinating because people thought it was some kind of Western American thing, this interest, but no, that too was a universal sexual difference. So
I still want to understand why people are upset about that. I know I sound like an absolute moron here. I'm really sorry. I just want to make sure I understand.
I think it comes from the idea that that the feeling is that our society prioritizes male sexuality, and that in this view, the female serves like things like fellatio. Fellatio is very prominent in society, especially at the time we did our research. Of the past 10 years, it's all very changed. It's radically different. But for most of our lives, fellatio is the main sexual idea, and women find that subservient. And so the idea that men and women are different, they were interpreting it as us saying that women need to keep on performing fellatio on men. That was kind of like buried in this, is that we were saying that's okay and that's just part of if men and women's sexuality is different, then women should be happy to do that. Like that sort of thing was always in.
That was the interpretation or something.
That's right. That if men and women are different, aren't you just locking into place male dominance in the sexual relationship? That the man initiates, the man's in control, the woman just goes along to make the man happy. That's not what we were saying, but that's what they fear.
I can see the fear, though. Okay.
Yeah, that's what if there's a biological reason men and women have different sexualities, then it seems to justify.
It seems like people are just scared of getting locked into rule sets, right? Like people want to believe that they have this individual sovereignty to become whatever the heck they want to become. Hopefully something good and useful and meaningful, but people just are afraid of losing that, I think. They're afraid of being boxed
I think it's something very specific, to be honest. with women's sexuality. So we talk about this in our book. One thing you see on lots of women porn sites, women erotic sites, is political material. They politicize it, and women, well, as the ones that attacked us, women are more likely to go out and fight against porn. Say, hey, this porn's demeaning to women, that sort of thing. And that politics goes on women's porn sites. You never find politics on a guy's site. Like, the last thing a guy wants to see when he's going on an erotic site is some political message, but that goes hand in hand with women's erotica. But we show, like, what's so ironic is, women will say, hey, this kind of porn is bad, this erotica is bad, but then they go and look at it anyway in their private time. We have access to what women are really doing, and women are actually consuming the exact kind of material they say women don't like, and it's being imposed on them by men. And like fan fiction, that is 100% women generated. It's a women's culture. There's no guys influencing that. And what you find, the erotic fantasies you find in fan fiction, is an exact reflection of the stuff that these the activist types are saying that women aren't interested in. But they created a whole culture on their own that is exactly the
That's
thing.
so interesting because, from like an evolutionary psychology standpoint, it seems like women in reproduction, which let's say is the origin of sexual intercourse in the first place, like, they would be very interested in dealing with things like security and not being oppressed and tyrannized and things like this. Whereas
so I think that the
men are like if we look at chimps or something, they're very much interested in tyrannizing and not worrying about the consequences of these kind of things.
So the crazy thing is, if I remember my sex research numbers correctly, is that women are actually generally into the violent and oppressive pornography, and men are kind of grossed out by it.
Because I took from his saying that they were more political.
So the one thing, the only sexual interest that ties all of us together, men and women, gay and straight, the one thing we all are aroused in common is dominance and submission, power themes. It runs through male's porn, it runs through female porn. It is the most common, prevalent, and the source of the greatest creativity of human.
But what's the woman political message then that's tied into that?
Oh, so this is another example of poor women. Their sexuality, their sex is very cognitive and cerebral compared to men, and so women want to get out of that, and so their fantasies are things that allow them to get out of it. But kind of the default is they're always backed up into the head. So the most prominent erotic art form for women is the romance novel. As many women read sexy romance novels as guys look at porn on the internet. The numbers are almost identical. And
but how does that get political?
I'm about to tell you.
Oh.
So for most of the history of romance novels until the 1990s, which is pretty darn recently, the most common narrative thread in romance novels was rape. So like in the opening scene, the hero would rape. Like, for a very famous example is a very famous romance novel about a pirate captain. So he gets a young woman and he rapes her in the opening scene, and then gradually she falls in love with him. So this was the basic trope in romance novels from its origin until the 90s. Gradually, politically, women said, hey, we can't be telling these stories. And it was very uncomfortable because women were like, well, this does turn me on. But I hear you're saying that we shouldn't, this is politically really bad for us. So there was a big political movement in the 90s. And so now you won't find in any normal mainstream conventional romance novel, you won't find that kind of rape story. But what female authors figured out, they know women actually want to read about non-consensual. Women want to read about a man who has so much lust for this woman. That's the key. They don't want to read about a woman who's just. They don't want to read about a man who's just angry and violent. A man who's just so sexually taken with a woman, he has to have her because she's so attractive and one of a kind. Like, that is the idea that he just can't resist her power, her beauty.
And he's generally also handsome. It's not like he's smelly handsome, and terrifying.
Powerful. He needs to be a prince or a pirate captain. Yeah, they don't want the gardener or the carpenter pulling this off. No, you don't find that. A rock star. Millionaires now, it jacked up to billionaires. A millionaire is not enough anymore.
Inflation, man. It's a hell of a drug.
A billionaire is what it takes to turn a woman on. But what contemporary female authors have figured out is paranormal romance. Paranormal romance allows non-consensual erotic scenes that don't trigger anybody. For example, a vampire.
Mm.
A vampire is, thousands of years old. So they're super handsome and super rich from thousands of things, and then they'll bite, and the scenes where they're biting the neck and the blood comes out. It seems like a sex penetration and the fluids flow, and she just has to submit. It's identical language and feel and vibes, but it's paranormal romance. It's a vampire and a woman. It's not rape.
Aren't women also like really into true crime, like watching these terrible sexual predators? But I think they like seeing them get caught is part of it too.
The true crime thing is really weird to me because it's clearly an almost exclusively female audience, and it's really salacious, and the level of
Really
detail that they
violent,
go into, it just...
I can't even listen to that stuff.
It freaks me out
Gives me
really bad,
nightmares.
especially because the advertising is all really female-centric. It's all for shapewear and lingerie and various other female tendencies, and so it's clear that it's targeted so deliberately to the female mind. And I must tie somehow into this obsession with the darker side of sex as well, because I feel like
But like a protected version of that or something, right? Like that's the politicization that I'm trying to understand. Is it seems like women want the protection, like they want to know that that's just a fantasy, like that ain't gonna really happen.
Yes, I mean that exactly right. I mean that's what I certainly can understand the discomfort if you have a sexual fantasy that turns you on, but you don't really want that exact thing in real life. I mean, it must be a source of cognitive dissonance, and that all played out in the open in the 90s. You go back then, women were discussing this in all kinds of forums. I mean, even in New York Times, places like that, kind of like talking about all this, sorting through this, trying to figure it out. Even now, it's still controversial, and women don't like to talk about it, understandably.
well, it's really tricky because there is a desire to remake the fundamental biology. We're trapped by this body that we're born into, the hormones that we're given. It is this hand that you're dealt, and you're just stuck with it. And the hand that you're dealt comes with all of these other things that if you have a preference or you have something that you like, it's not like you can have that preference in a vacuum. It's part of this entire web of other preferences and ways that people will treat you and implications that they'll draw from it. And so it's like totally...
People are just trying to level the playing field in some sense?
I think that people are aspirational. Like, I think this was kind of, from everything that I've read about the Soviet Union, this was the basis of communism. It was the idea that we can remake the human spirit in a few generations and to erase, the greedy capitalist bullshit and replace it with this utopian, egalitarian communist being. Like there was a tendency towards equality of the sexes in the Soviet Union.
Right,
like, there was lots of women who worked outside
it's
the
like
house.
part of this bigger progressive project towards leveling the playing field. Essentially, it's like, I mean, and it's best in its most charitable version of itself.
Leveling the playing field and also being able to remake yourself in the vision of what you want to be rather than what you are, right? Because we want to be able to transcend our biology. And yet we're so like helplessly trapped by it.
And that's also kind of like the American dream, right? You can be anything you want. Just work hard, Johnny.
Yeah.
Which is like aspirational in some sense.
It's the transhumanist dream as well. It's the, do you know the biocosmists?
No, I do not.
So there was it was the Soviet movement right around the time that they started the space program, where there was a philosophy of go anywhere, do anything, be anyone. This limitless human potential that you could constantly remake yourself into something new. And it's kind of experiencing a rebirth right now among the people that call themselves the Accelerationists. Do you know who the Accelerationists are?
No.
Okay, so the Accelerationists are basically people who are like, look, there is a utopian technological future that is just over the hill, and it is our job to press on the accelerator as fast as we can and spool up technology as fast as we can and develop it to its absolute maximum potential so we can reach that utopian future where we all live forever.
That's a terrible idea.
Some of the biggest figures in Silicon Valley are Accelerationists.
Yeah.
And so there's this huge push towards it. And I feel like there's all this transhumanist stuff and a lot of the communist ideals, because these guys were hardcore communists that believed in this idea of go anywhere, do anything, be anything. And so I feel like that's what this is. This is a desire to remake biology, to no longer be bound by the past, because it feels so antiquated to be born into a body and to be limited by, the hormones that you were developmentally exposed to.
I totally agree that we're in a time where people want to escape their body or transform their body. That's a deep impulse, but the irony is, as I just said, what's actually happening, sexually is that we're all converging on a homogeneous sexual state. Before the internet, as our data showed, there was incredible variety of sexual tastes, erotic interests, just incredible diversity. Our book was originally titled Rule 34, which was an internet meme from the 90s and 2000s. It's no longer true now. It's if it exists, there is internet porn of it. That's Rule 34. If it exists, to reflect the idea that absolutely every sexual idea was available, but that's not true anymore. That was the case 15 years ago. It's not the case now.
And did those cluster by culture, like by geographic differences? And
so there was some. This is the heart of our book. Most of the big interest were similar everywhere in every culture: East, West, North, Global South. But there were a few cultural variants, but they were always kind of interesting, revealing. One of my favorites is bestiality, sex with animals, which has about the same level of interest in every country. But the most popular animal for bestiality, erotica, was different in each country. So New
that's
Zealand,
a really
it was a
ancient
sheep.
one.
Saudi was a camel. What do you think it was here in America? I bet you can guess.
A
Dog.
dog?
Dog, exactly right. How about England?
I don't have a dog, for the record.
England? Horse?
Yes, I think pony. I think it was a pony.
It's really crazy because if you go back to, this is like completely left out of the history books for the most part, but almost all of the ancient religions involve bestiality to some extent. Alongside we hear about animal sacrifice all the time, but what we don't hear is that they were doing the animals before they sacrificed them. Really, in like every single ancient pre-religious society. It's really wild. It's not a small thing.
Do you have like a deeper analysis of that, or you
it just
made
makes
the
sense to me why
observation, you
just
filed it
like
away?
from like an evolutionary perspective, it seems like it's a conserved lineage.
So do you think that it's still the same 10% of people that were always around that were like, no, I'll do the sacrifice. It's fine. I'll take the burden, that are the ones that are looking for the bestiality
It's just
porn
something
today?
baked into the human mind. Yeah. I mean, dogs will also like jump on any animal that they can get a hold of. Like, it's not a uniquely human thing.
There's this guy who I really want to, I'm trying to figure out a good frame to have him on the show, who's absolutely dead certain that humans are the result of a hybridization event between a pig and a chimp. And one of the lines of evidence that he uses to make this case is that occasionally these like dog-cow hybrids will be born on farms where they'll have like a cow body but with dog paws on the ends of the legs, or like a dog face on a cow body. And he has all these photographs, including one video of this tiny dog. It must be like a what was Freya? Yeah,
like a terrier.
Like a terrier mounting a cow that's just lying on the ground, who's just like whatever. And so he's making the case. He's like, they're always born to cows because you can have a dog mount a cow, but you can't have a cow mount a dog.
And there's all these ancient traditions, right, of hybrid human-animal organisms too, like the centaur and the Pegasus. Well, that's a bird. But, you know what I mean? The humans have been fascinated with these half animal, half human.
And like the concept of species is really loose too when you start talking to biologists, and it turns out that the species concept is kind of an antiquated marker that we used to bin things because it was neat and convenient, but then realize
that's a perfect reflection of the great science fallacy of prioritizing things over activities. You know, it's we impose all these categories, but the categories aren't real. So then you realize that there's always fuzzy, blurry lines between the different categories. So yeah, that's absolutely the case.
So I still
let me say one other thing about bestiality. One other fun fact that we came up with, that also it's illustrative of the difference between male and female sexuality. The difference between male and female sexuality is expressed in all of this. So we looked at bestiality in depth. We looked at all sexual interests in depth, except for pedophilia. We didn't touch that. But not really to our surprise, men and women have very different approaches to bestiality that are reflective of their different sexual natures generally. So, guys in general like to look at things, and they like things to be quick and physical, and they don't need story. They don't need personality. They don't need a lot. Women, they need story. They need character. They care about the actual person that they're with. That's why it's a romance novel. They prefer novels over videos. Guys would prefer a short video clip, and we see this in the sexual relations with animals. So guys will describe, oh yeah, I had sex with my dog because its legs were so curved and it was so sensual. The streamlined body was so sensual. And you talk to the woman, and she says, he had such a friendly personality. I could tell he was interested and he was eager for it. It focuses on the feelings of the animal and how the relationship with the animal. So you find that even in the expression sexual relations with animals, it's rather remarkable.
I'm still trying to understand how the female porn is politicized. That was the upfront thesis.
It's that women
just because the presence of a narrative.
Erotica. What's that?
Just because the presence of a narrative, period, opens the door to politicization, like you're expressing ideations, ideologies in the narrative, or?
Yes. So because women's sexuality is narrative, it's narrative and personality based. If you look at men's porn, there ain't no narrative, and they don't care about personality. They want vapid, vacant. They want unemployed, teenage girls is what they want. Women want, a king, a general who's battle tested from decades of war.
It makes sense. It makes sense.
The clerk at Starbucks, is a good thing for porn. So women look at this and they're horrified because that doesn't match at all what they want to be in a guy's mind, and they imagine, if they get rid of the porn, then men will start to share their taste. They'll start to appreciate the narrative more. They'll appreciate personality more. It's a fallacy, as much as, and plenty of guys think if they just keep showing porn to their girlfriends, eventually they'll, start to like it too, and start to like that graphic stuff. And again,
what's really
these are general terms. There are some women that like visual porn, and there's some guys that like erotic stories. So let's be clear about that.
What's really interesting is they're both fantasies, right? Like, no guy wants to end up with the teenage unemployed person, right? That's not going to make a good long-term partner for them. It's not really realistic. And the women also, like, these things that they don't actually want to be pillaged by a vampire either, but these are both fantasies. It's like the importance of fantasy and the ability to live out these alternate realities that you don't actually have to really proceed with, it seems to be really, really important to being a human. Like, that's why we love horror movies. That's why we love watching things like, I don't know, we love watching criminals do crime in movies, in stories, as long as it's not real, and maybe they get caught, maybe they don't get caught, but it's safe, and it's like we can try on the repercussions of all of these things without actually having to experience the consequences. It's
absolutely. The trouble comes when your fantasy comes up against your partner's fantasy, and you realize those fantasies are quite different. And a lot of, on both sides, this is certainly not exclusive to women. Guys have the exact same reaction on the other end, but women are more apt to turn it into they're more apt to join a group and talk about it in public. That, a woman sees a man's fantasy and that's nothing at all like what she imagines or what she wants. Her fantasy is a connection, that we're both sharing this relationship, that we're sharing our personalities and our emotions, and that's going to be the core of the sexual thing. And then you see the guy's fantasy, which is like, I want you to, I want you to wear leather and bend over and shake yourself and twerk for me for 5 minutes, and that's so when that seems to be the core of it, the core of the male fantasy, and the woman can't find well, where's the personality and the story and the emotions, and how come you're not talking about that? It can be very, disturbing, frightening, and women then, and again, same is true in the guys then, but women then look for, why is this? This can't be how my man is. He must have gotten this way because of the porn. Like something made him this way. Culture made him this way. And so when Sai and I were doing our research and saying, no, this is just how guys are, a lot of women like, well, that's horrifying. That can't be the case. These guys are promoting, a bad political view. It's really a political view, not a scientific view, is what they were saying about us. But that's the reality, is that we have different fantasies, exactly like you said. It just our brains are designed for different fantasies. The only fantasy where we can, our fantasies overlap is that domination and submission. Again, if you can find a way to work that can make everybody happy.
I guess it's political because either side wants to use the scientific understanding of it to justify whatever ends. Like the men want to say, oh, well, that's just how men are, so we're allowed to behave this way. And the women want to say, well, you've been taught to behave that way, and that's why. And so you're not actually permitted to behave that way.
Well, this is
right.
Whenever you get into biological questions like this is always the argument that comes up, right? Are you a specific way because of socialization in your cultural context, or is there something that is biochemically creating you to be this way, and you can only fight against it to a certain degree?
Biology is oppressive, man.
Biology is oppressive. I think that it's possibly the greatest oppressive force in the universe.
A great oppressor.
Yeah. And so
that was a question we were trying to peel apart in our research, is what is the biological and what is the cultural? And as I said, there were things that were cultural. So, for example, one thing that's clearly biological for men is an attraction to youth. So in every country we looked at on Earth, youth was always the number one interest in every single country among men. But there was an interest in granny porn, not just MILFs. MILFs are usually, MILFs originally were women in their 30s and 40s, but these days, MILF seems to be anybody over 25.
Oh man, inflation gets everything.
Good Lord, yeah. But so granny porn, there is huge cultural variations. So for example, granny porn is popular in Kenya and England and Czechoslovakia, and we were able to figure out in each of these countries a cultural reason that was the case, but definitely not universally. There's a lot of countries where there's no interest in granny porn at all. So, when you look at a billion people from around the globe, you can start to tease these apart. What it really is the biology? What is the same everywhere, and where do we see the variations? And
what was the cultural justification in Kenya, Czechoslovakia, and what was the other place?
Each one had its own. England. So in Kenya, apparently the culture there is boys learn about sex from their grandmother. Now, they don't have sex with their grandmother, but if they have sexual questions, the talk about puberty and that sort of thing happens for a boy with his grandmother, not with dad. And so perhaps, that learning sex from an older, experienced woman, again, they're not having sex, but just having those conversations and being initiated into this world, perhaps that does something. In England, it's a boarding school culture, matrons, same as BDSM is very popular in England, and the BDSM culture is very connected with the boarding school, getting spanked, by your matronly teacher.
It's super hot man.
So that's probably why there. And then in Czechoslovakia, they're right next door to the Netherlands, and the Czechs heavily go to the Netherlands, and there's a lot of older prostitutes there that are very popular among the Czechs too. So that it might just be something about that. The Czechoslovakia one was the one we were the least clear on, but Kenya and England have pretty good stories.
What brought you into the fold of this? Like what drove you? What inspired you to even take a look at this?
Intex, my experiences with extraterrestrials, because what I personally wanted to understand was gender. During the experiences I have of extraterrestrial contact, gender becomes very strange and very fluid. And I mean, it's a question: if you're the only human, around aliens, what does gender even mean then? Gender is a social, artifact, a cultural construction. And if you're not around any humans at all, then what is it? So, so I was very interested to understand gender, and to understand gender, I thought I needed to understand sexuality top to bottom. So,
what were the questions that you had about gender in trying to understand it?
Well, to be completely honest, one, I know this is going to sound bonkers, but one very prominent question was, when I have my encounters with extraterrestrials, I go into a place called the Maze of Souls. And when I interact with them, sometimes there's the ability to become someone else. I can become somebody else. And so I had a question for all of this. Is it better to be a man or a woman? If I want to be communicating with extraterrestrials and jumping from world to world, is it better to be a man or a woman, or is there no difference? And so that was a very real question for me. And my conclusion was there's no benefit in either way. I wanted to understand how tied was gender to biology, and how much was it socially constructed. And I came away feeling it was largely social. So there's clear biological differences. Male fantasies are different than female fantasies, but gender itself is it's laced into that, but it's not the same as that. Gender influences biological. Biological sexuality influences gender very strongly, and our sex reacts to gender naturally too. What we're turned on, especially for women. So there's a relationship, but yeah, they're not identical.
Can you unpack that a little bit? Because I feel like I have a really poor understanding of the difference between sex and gender.
So, easy example. Girls wear skirts, boys wear shorts, but not in Scotland. Scotland, the men wear skirts. So that would be a gender difference that's not rooted in any biological reality. Women wear skimpy clothes. Now, over time in the West, women, the bathing suits got smaller and smaller and skimpy and skimpy and showing more and more flesh. That's a gender construction, because bathing suits used to be much different. We can watch the change in the bathing suit. Genetics aren't changing during that same time, so there's not a biological change. And
men's suits didn't get smaller.
Men's got smaller too, but they weren't.
Yeah,
it wasn't the same. Oh, but men. It was originally like pajamas. Their bathing suit was originally covered the shirt. You had straps too, so they did it too. But the women's is obviously much more prominent than that, and then that influences the biology of sex, because men, the more flesh a man sees because of his biology, the more arousing it is, and so then that becomes Sports Illustrated. The bikini issue. That's a combination. That's a combination of the biology, because men want any excuse to look at scantily clad women, but it's also gender, because our gender construct in the West is that women can wear these skimpy bikinis. In Saudi Arabia, that's not true. You don't see women in bikinis in Saudi Arabia, and that's a gender construct.
But these gender constructs seem to reflect these sexual fantasies to some extent.
Well, again, go back in time, and women were fully covered. So the whatever the sexual fantasy might have been, it wasn't strong enough to get women out of their clothes. There were other cultural factors that were constraining it.
Demystify Sci is a project that is supported almost exclusively by viewers like you. And so if you've watched a couple of episodes and you really like what we do and you want to support the podcast, consider coming over to patreon.com. In return for a couple dollars a month, what you're going to end up getting is both of our episodes for the week early. You get them on Saturdays instead of having to wait until Monday and Thursday like the rest of the world. And you get access to one of my favorite things in the world, which is our Sunday patron chat. We are breaking the tradition of isolated communication in the digital age, and we get together every Sunday over Zoom, and we talk about the big questions that are running through our heads. Sometimes it's questions that the patrons bring, sometimes it's things that we're curious about, and this is really the place where we get to guide the ship. And so come on over to patreon.com and sign up to give us a couple dollars a month and participate in the patron chat. If you can't do that right now, that is totally fine. You can subscribe to the channel, you can leave a comment, you can come to our Discord server, you can come to our Facebook group, you can follow us on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok. We are in all of these places and would love your support in any way that you can show it. Hopefully, we'll see you there. Do you think that sex as a cultural factor has become stronger over the course of the last 100 years or something? Because I don't think that sexuality has become any I would be surprised if fundamental preferences had really changed.
They have.
But they have.
Yes.
How do
So
you
that
know?
was my point. Well, when we did our research, the people getting online to express their sexuality had acquired that sexuality offline. We were looking at the first generation of sexual content. So the things that aroused people were things that they acquired in the real world. But that's been there now for 20 years. So all young people, anybody born in the past 20 years, anybody born in the last 30, what would be 35 years? So it's start 15. So anybody born in the last 35 years, so anybody 35 or less learned about sex online. So they looked at pictures online. Before that, we looked at real stuff, so you find, we found people that were sexually aroused by trees, things like that, and wet look, like that was something else. There was people who had sexual fetishes for things in the world, and that's radically diminished. Now it's incest porn, step parents porn. It's like such a narrow set of stuff now, and you're really hard pressed to find that natural diversity. We're all looking at the same stuff, and then it's just getting cycled back. We're all cycling through the same material, and we're all looking at it. Before, nobody knew what other people's sexual interests were. I mean, until we did our research, the only significant research on what turned people on was by Kinsey in the 40s and 50s. That was it. That was the only major study. You might think, they must have done replications and extensions and kept building on it. No, that was it. Because of the politics in sex are awful. Cy and I feel that, and we couldn't wait to get out. It is tough to do research on sex. You just get so much pressure. And today it's got to be even worse with the social media now. I can't even imagine those poor sex researchers. But yeah.
I'm really intrigued by what you found in your experiences with the Intex about not having a real preferential platform, like one gender not being superior to the other in terms of examining the universe and all of its consequences. Did you find that like integrating those two perspectives was where the power was, or was it just that either one was sufficient by itself, and that's
the message was the individuality. It's the individual mind that gender's irrelevant in the bigger scheme of
it adds or subtracts nothing, in other words.
Yes, it will give your flavor. It'll give a distinctive flavor. I would like nothing more than to find a woman who's contacted Intex in the manner I haven't seen her perspective. That would be wonderful. But I think it's just different coloring, not a fundamentally different or a fundamental difference in one's ability to progress or advance or understand or develop or any of those things.
Because I found it
within the Intex world.
I found like insane amount of value in now for like 10 years having lived with a woman. But I wonder if that's more of a sex thing than a gender thing, like in terms of the biology, not like in terms of sexual intercourse, but like I wonder if that's more. Like there's something, I grew up with men, right? I spent all of my 20s living with men. Men have a culture, and it might be a gendered culture. There might be a sexual, biological side of that, but it's a very different set of wisdoms than those that I have gained by living with a woman for the subsequent 10 years. And I've got a lot of strength out of that, actually, because I've learned to see the world in a very different way. Not that I've abandoned the way that I used to see it, but I have two sort of pillars to stand on. Yeah. And I don't know what contribution that is of gender and what contribution that is of biology, sex, whatever you want to call it. The word sex sucks. It's like whenever you say sex, people assume you're talking about doing it. I'm just talking about the biological aspects.
You can say biological sex.
Yeah, it's just a difficult.
Well, I think in that context, Shilo, you're just talking about a human relationship, right? I don't know.
No, not at all. Not a human relationship. I had a lot of human relationships with men previously. I mean, but in the biological sense of the word sex, they were sexed relationships because they were all of our conversations and everything were definitely squarely in the male gender, or whatever the heck you call it. So it was a very different way of looking at the world with different values, different wisdoms, different strengths, different aspirations than that I've gotten. And when I was a little kid, I had a lot of friends that were girls too, and I sort of lost that in high school, like when I went into, through puberty and stuff. But I realize that now that both, like, the value of living around both of those perspectives and really being close to both is extraordinary. And they do seem to be totally different ways of looking at the world. I just don't know if it's a gender thing or a sex thing, biological sex.
Well, I mean, you can probably tease that apart by doing a thought experiment where it's possible where if you had lived with men that were more queer, you would have had a different gender.
You mean just more effeminate men?
Well, I was actually about to say, now we're talking a little bit about kind of a stereotype notion of male and female, and why I said, it's really about a relationship rather than gender, is that masculinity has a wide range. There are effeminate men, there's even queer men, but there's also men that are heterosexual but submissive and effeminate, and there's very strong-willed women. That there's powerful women, dominant women that want to subjugate their man even though they're heterosexual. So that could be a relationship too, and they could have imagine a dominant man, a dominant woman, submissive man. They could have a powerful relationship, and they too would say, I feel greater power, but the power would come from your differences, a difference in perspective, and you could call that perspective female, and there might be female elements, but I imagine what you're really talking about is you learn certain kinds of things from your guy friends and your guy family members, and now you're getting something different from your wife, but how much that is gender and how much it's just a different personality and the specific dynamics that happen between the two of you. I always look at it in terms of, in a relationship, in a marriage, it's about the dynamics. You cease to become one. She behaves and her behavior triggers you and your behavior triggers her. And it's an endless cycle, and you can no longer separate, you can no longer separate it. And it's the dynamic, and whatever you're playing off of her, there's surely to be female aspects, but it's most likely what you're reacting to is something that's different than yourself or something about yourself. You're each reacting to specific parts of each other's personality that are of interest to you or used to you, that sort of thing. So you each have a constellation of interests.
It's not my first rodeo though either. Like I feel like I've encountered aspects of this anytime that I've lived with women in the past. Like there seems to be a thread to it. And you're right. Like my experiences are totally stereotypical. I lived with stereotypical dudes. I grew up in the 90s culture in suburban America. I played on sports teams. All my relationships were very stereotypical masculine teenager interactions. And honestly, my relationships with women were also very stereotypical and, not at all radical in any sense like that. But again, so, is that because the stereotypical culture reflects the biology, or is it because the stereotypical culture is shaping perception of the biology?
Well, there's a certain intimacy that you develop when you live with someone that you don't when you're on a sports team or you're just friends, right?
Well, you got to live with those guys all the time. Like I lived with, you're not necessarily sleeping in the same bed, but you're sharing hotel rooms when you're touring. And
there are these moments. They're momentary interactions where you go into a place and you have some kind of interaction, and then you're able to leave that place and basically just retreat to a protected.
Not if you room with people and stuff. I mean, you're spending just as much time as we spend together with these people. I wasn't, anyways, when I was growing up.
But I don't know. Do you think that those relationships are as intimate?
I think that they informed my view of the social world. Like, that's how I thought the world worked. And now that I live with you, or any time that I've lived with anybody of the opposite sex, I have a new, different take on how the world works. It's very uncanny. And it's definitely stereotypical.
I might point out that, imagine two gay men, they're going to talk in the exact same terms about their partner, Shilo, that you are, that my partner offers me things in intimacy that I don't get from anywhere else. They would talk in the same terms, but they're both men. So that's why I think when we're talking about intimacy and the stability and a strength of a relationship, it's the dynamics of those two people. I mean, if it was limited to a male and female thing, then how would gay men or lesbian women ever have, the same kind of stability or power or sense of connection, that sort of thing? But they do. So that's why I think it's more at the level you're talking about.
No, look, there's a separation here. Like, a lot of the reasons that I love my wife have nothing to do with her being a woman or being gendered or whatever. Like, I would say most of them. Like, I love the way her mind works in terms of solving problems, her ambition, her, just radiation, right? I love those things, which you're right. That could definitely be housed in anybody. But there are these gendered or sexualized aspects which are particular to the way that Anastasia and any woman I've really been so stereotypically associated with have seen the world in a very different way than me and my guy friends saw the world. And it really is a different lens that is stereotypical. And that's not specifically what attracts me to her, but it is a very different way of looking at the world that I've seen in multiple individuals.
So I've always wondered if that is the core of all relationships, no matter what sex or gender is performed in them, if it is this union of two different perspectives on the world. And that's kind of a necessity for making a relationship work, because otherwise you don't have the sense of pieces kind of slotting into each other the way that
pieces slotting into each other.
Well, I like puzzle.
That said that.
Right, you can't avoid it. That's my point. Is you can't.
Well, no, I mean, pieces slot in many different ways. My point is that it's like there is a sense that a human is not a single individual. That a human is an incomplete being that becomes completed through the relationships that they form. And it would make sense that the most intimate relationship possible is the one that completes you in the most holistic way. And I would imagine that that is a key ingredient in all successful intimate relationships. And friendships aren't quite the same way, because it's easier to just have friends who see the world the same way that you do, and they parallelize you rather than completing you in this deep spiritual way. I don't know.
Parallelize?
Yeah, like there's more of you. Like, okay, so if you have friends and your friends, what makes a friend?
They reinforce one another, essentially. Less than complement.
I just think that friends tend to align and have worldviews that are not necessarily complementary. I think that their worldviews are similar. Like, my closest friends are the ones that have some fundamental tenet of being able to look at the world in the same way. But I would say that you and I don't look at the world in the same way.
Yeah, and from that standpoint, if you're just talking about complementarity, then somebody who grows up in a masculinized culture like myself would be attracted to something completely radically different on that spectrum. Maybe. That's my biological theory.
Where you're like, this is what the same sort of thing of the like kids in Kenya transferring attraction to grandmothers because that's the context in which they grew. You're like, I grew up in this masculine culture and so have transferred my attractiveness onto something that is the other because it is what fundamentally would complete
It's
me.
like the experience I didn't ever have in my development otherwise.
What do you think, Ogi?
I'm Chase, psychologist.
I think that it's interesting. I've never really thought about what the fundamental difference is between friendship and romantic relationship. Like, why don't all friendships turn into romantic relationships, and why is there a fundamental difference? Like, what is the friend zone for people?
I mean, I think the romance always dips into the sexuality. I mean, there has to be some kind of erotic or sexual thread to it for there to be romance. And also, I mean, that's why, romance is still largely a young person's game. As you get older, you have a very different attitude towards these things and towards relationships too. I mean, I know when I was younger, romance is always important to some extent, but I think when you're younger, it's more alive and meaningful and important. And as you get older, you just want the intimacy, the connection, the relationship with another human being.
There was a study that I saw this morning, and literally I just breezed through it, but I think that it was something that 40% of, I think it's the Zoomer generation, thinks that marriage is an outdated institution that they have no use for anymore, which is going to be a really interesting thing to see.
I think it'll be easier for a young person. When I'll see if they still feel that way when they're in their 40s and pushing 50.
I mean, in some sense, I wonder if gender didn't evolve as a sort of just, I don't want to say guardrails, but like a proscribed path that's easy to understand how you're going. If you separate people into two bins very neatly along sexual lines and you give them very opposite characteristics, then it's much easier for somebody to sort out in a society where they need to look to complete themselves, something like that. It just seems easier in some sense. It's less complicated.
Most animals have sex differences, though, right?
For sure.
And so it seems like it would not be something that's elected. It's something that would be.
But the gender is like
away.
a celebration of those differences, right? The concept of gender, like where you put skirts on the girls or the swimsuits or something. It like, I don't know if celebrate's the right word, but it highlights and puts those on display, right?
Animals don't have gender. I mean, that's a good way to think about it. Animals only have sex. They don't have. There's no gender for a chimpanzee or a horse.
But they have different roles in society, right? Like chimp society, still the males and females play different parts, right? They're behaviorally different. It's not just like their pieces are different.
Right. Yes, that's right.
And so, isn't gender just an extension of that? To some
No,
extent?
gender is a social construction. I mean, you could tell if something's gender if you can see it changing in different cultures. Like skirts is not a universal sign of femininity. It's not a biological thing. It's certainly a cultural thing. So what would be a skirt among the chimpanzees?
It's just a role that they would play, like the women.
Some kind of grooming behavior or some kind of food preparation or food search ingredient or tendency, right?
That's biological. It's always the same. There's not cultural variance to that.
I don't know enough about chimps to know if there's any kind of variance across that. Like, are there any chimp tribes where there's females that go on raids and males that stay behind and like deal with the fruit? I don't know.
That'd be really interesting. I know that the women definitely play into the hierarchy and the dividing of meat. I know as much as one documentary I've seen on Netflix about chimps, but I remember like one of the women had a higher role in the distribution of meat.
Woman is a human female.
The lady chimp. One of the lady chimps was higher in the social hierarchy and had a bigger role in the dividing of the monkey meat. But I don't know.
I go so far to say it's biologically impossible for anybody but humans to have culture because we're the only supermind. You need a supermind. You need language to have culture and all that goes along with it. So it's not even conceivable. It doesn't make physical sense.
But they do have these very complex social hierarchies and relationships and people climbing these hierarchies, chimps climbing these hierarchies, and they have inter-tribe conflict and they make war plans. And
do you attribute that purely to just biological mindless activity?
Yes, it is biological. And every mammal has social hierarchies, and certainly the great apes is very pronounced, and we inherit it too. But we can see what's the difference between us and chimps is that we can overcome the social hierarchy. It's still very powerful, the urge for there to be an alpha male, and it's reinforced by everyone. The problem, this has always been the problem. Women are sexually attracted to alpha males, and so women are always attacking alpha males. Why are the men, all the CEOs and presidents, women should have these roles too? It's those dastardly men, but women sexually desire them. They want them. They celebrate them. So women are reinforcing the alpha male as much as the males are, and that's also taken from our primate cousins. Female chimpanzees are most sexually attracted to the alpha male, the ones in charge, just like us. But we can overcome it. We can create societies that aren't dominance hierarchies with a guy at the top. But it takes effort. It takes culture. It takes learning and knowledge. We have to overcome it.
I'm not sure they're dominance hierarchies, though. I think they're more like competence hierarchies. Like they're
dominance hierarchies.
Sorry?
There are definitely dominance hierarchies.
Well, no, because like men who can succeed in a society in a given landscape and find themselves at the top of any field where they're absolutely other men themselves have lifted them up on their shoulders. That's a really easy surrogate marker for women to be like, all right, well, the men have already vetted all these other men have vetted this man. So of course I can just pick off the top then because the other men did all the work for me in evaluating these people. So they're selecting based on their competence. They're not selecting because they're like like the meanest people who are beating everybody and terrorizing. And
No, it's just a turn on. There's none of that intellectualization. Like, what's Gray? Gray. What's the erotic story with Gray?
50 Shades of Grey.
50 Shades of Grey. I can't believe I couldn't remember that. Like 50 Shades of Grey, right? The billionaire hero at the start of that. There's no. He's just a hot guy. Why is he hot? Women won't actually say immediately because he's rich. It's just he feels hot. He seems hot. Just hearing about this is hot. If you break it down, it's because he's rich and powerful. But it's not. Oh, it's because clearly he would not have gotten there if all the men didn't respect him. Like that's not an intellectual part of it. It's just that's the source of arousal. Like a guy being aroused by a boob. It's not. Well, I'm turned on by it because I know the bigger the boob, the more milk it will produce for my child, and I want that milk. That's no part of it. Neither is women analyzing or reflecting on what a man had to do to get to the top. Women tend to think, alpha males, they're just hot that way. I just heard a song by Julia Michaels that was like, good boys talk about heaven, but bad boys take you there. Something like that. But it was just celebrating bad boys and alpha males. And like, it was celebrating, they just are that way. There's no secret. They're just born this way. That's who they are. I mean, that's the sexual fantasy of it. They're just sprung into this world, destined to be the prince. That's who they're born to be.
So these tendencies of men and women that you found in your research, they don't have any anchor in gender. So like men who identify as more effeminate, let's say, on the gender spectrum, would still have proclivities for, let's say, the boob or something very physical and short-lived. And women who identified across the gender spectrum would still have affinities for these narrative-driven ideations.
Yes. I mean, the core interest. So guys everywhere, even ones who are feminine, all men born with male brains that did not have something particularly unusual. There's a lot of variation, but there's not a lot of variation on this. Men like to look at things. They like bodies. They like flesh. They like anatomy. That's just wired into everybody. Like I said, even guys that are attracted to animals, right? I mean, that's why this is so manifest. Attracted to dogs, they talk about the dogs in the exact same term that they would talk about a woman. So even though it's a very different sexual target, it's not even a human sexual target. The way that they're feeling it, what their desires fixated on, is still the same. It's still male. It's still a male desire.
So
and gay men are exactly the same.
So gender seems to have absolutely nothing to do with sex, then, essentially. Like
they feed on each other.
Concepts.
Like a man might be aroused by skinny bikinis. But that would be particular to the West. You're not going to find somebody, in Saudi Arabia 20 years ago that would be aroused by that. They would never even have seen that. I mean, they might be turned on if you showed them a picture of that, but that would not be a dominant sexual interest of theirs because they would have never been exposed to that gender specific form of thing. But so it's things like that, and then like I said, you get this swimsuit issue. That's very gendered, but it's also fitting male sexuality. It's like a different way to express. The expression is men want to look at things. The culture is bikinis. Bikini swimsuit issue of Sports Illustrated. That's a very specific cultural gendered thing, but it's still connected to male biological sexuality.
I wonder if the evolutionary push is not away from the separation of genders. That seems to be the underlying push of a feminism that says that there's no difference between men and women. What they're saying is that we don't want there to be differences between men and women, and we're going to push towards a future where that is the case by making decisions that bring us closer and closer to that.
That's a strong political mode. When I told you we got attacked by mobs. That was the political idea at the core, is that we should be all working towards a future where we view sexuality as entirely cultural, that there's we don't think there's biological differences. We don't say, oh, guys like to look at boobs because they're born that way. We should all understand that it's because they saw pictures of boobs when they were young. And if we take away those pictures, it's not going to happen. It's just not true. I mean, one of the most famous cases of this, there was this famous doctor at Johns Hopkins named Dr. John Money. I actually interviewed him a long time ago. So he was probably the biggest respected academic proponent of the idea that men and women are the same, that all differences are cultural, it's not biological, and we should all work towards getting rid of them. And he famously, there was a boy born genetically male. The doctor during circumcision burned off his entire penis.
Oh my God.
And Dr. John Money got involved, and he said, just raise him as a girl. If you just raise him from the start as a girl, he'll have female interests, he'll become a girl, because, sex is, it's cultural, not biological. And very famously, the boy immediately was interested in boy things all his life, attracted, he wanted to look at porn of girls, even though he was wearing dresses, they were in dresses, and treated him like a girl, gave him a girl's name, play with the girls, but he wanted, play with trucks and throw rocks and then look at porn. And then when he found out what had happened to him, he committed suicide, took his own life. So, it's clearly not the case that sex is social. And there's lots of examples, but that's the most famous, because it was literally the most prominent advocate of this view that men and women's sexuality is entirely cultural.
Did they leave his hormone system intact? Did he keep his testes?
No, they took off his testes. I don't know the hormone treatment. This was a while ago. This was before the modern sex change science, medicine got so developed. I mean, today we know a lot about it, but I think this might have been the 60s or no, I think this was the 70s. I think this was the 70s. I'm not entirely sure, but
interesting. So like those systems were impressed in his neonatal development or something. The sexual preferences, or not preferences, sexual attributes,
sexual interests, sexuality. I mean, writ large.
Yeah, like what? But what do you make of that? Because if you don't have the hormone system, I guess you don't remember exactly if the hormone system was intact or not. Or if there was
they gave him hormones, but it wouldn't have been with the same kind of knowledge and precision that they could do today. But yeah, I know he definitely got some hormones, and he hated them. He didn't like those at all.
No, he didn't get male hormones though.
No, female hormones. Yeah, he got female hormones.
God, that's crazy. Can you imagine waking up and realizing that this is that your parents did this to you with the complicit doctors that encouraged them to do so? I mean, I can imagine why you would kill yourself at that point. It's just to know what a terrible, terrible thing had happened to you and how nobody had protected you.
What can you do? I mean, they burned off his dingling.
I mean, it's obviously it's a tragedy, and Dr. John Money is definitely at fault, but he was pursuing science as he saw it. It wasn't like he was a fraudster. It wasn't like he saw the evidence and rejected it and went on this course. He believed his assessment of the available data, that this was the view. So, it was scientific. It's hard to attribute malevolence to anybody involved in this. Everybody just wanted the best outcome. But nevertheless, it's a tragedy due to ignorance or one's political beliefs. He clearly he wanted this to be true. He wanted the idea of men and women to be cultural, to be true. A lot of people do. A lot of women do. That it seems to bode better for equality down the road if ultimately we're the same. Is the feeling, but.
That's kind of what I mean, right? Because like as soon as you start talking about men and women, like we were, there's this climbing gym that we go to when we go down to the bay, and there's this wall that's like, I feel most like a woman when, and people have written all these things on it, and you read it and you're like, none of these things have anything to do with being a woman. It's like, I feel most like a woman when I climb really hard. Or it's like when I get tired, but I keep going.
When I stand up for myself.
Yeah, you're like that. What does that have to do with being a woman? And Shilo and I went through and we had all these conversations, and I kind of came down to the point where I think that the defining characteristic can only be reproduction. Like
Defining characteristic of what?
of womanhood is being able to bear a child.
Oh, I think it's more than that.
I don't know. Okay, so what characteristics can you attribute to woman that wouldn't also be found in man and be beneficial to be found in?
Well, this is another the main reason I was motivated to look into sex is because Intex, but I also am just broadly interested in the mind, and the sexual mind is something that nobody was studying. When Sai and I were first embarking on this, we talked to 10 different colleagues, mostly neuroscientists, and 100% of them, every single one of them said, don't do it. And curiously, they also all said, all of them, you're not going to find anything. What do you think you're going to find from doing this? But here's the truth. Women's amicability, I don't know what's it, social ability goes all the way down. Even in their core sexual interests, women want personality. They value personality. They value a personhood. They value the story. They value the relationship, even at the very core of women's sexuality. Guys, you go past a certain level, and it is none of that. Male porn is all about the guy's pleasure as fast as possible, as keenly as possible. The women are empty zombies. We care about their bodies. We hardly ever even look at their eyes. We don't care what they're thinking in guys porn and guys erotica. So women are sociable and care about others and care about relationships all the way up and down their psyche. And that's not true for guys. Guys have a place they can go that's biological and will never go away, where they can be wild and rough and dominate women without having to worry about their personality and all. And that's part of them that's not in women. So, there's a reality, a biological reality there that we can't avoid.
But I think that boils down to kids, though. Like, I think that is a side effect of what you need in order to raise a baby in a world where you're stuck with the baby. The dude can leave, but you have a baby that you're going to have to feed with your body. And so it's hard for me to not take all of those things down to their essence, which is to say that the definition has to be reproductive in nature.
It is, but you could equally say it's sociability. There's no difference. Like you're choosing to say reproduction, but women quite literally need society to be stable and whole. Like all the things they're interested in are pro-society, and all the things they're doing to evaluate a guy is this guy pro-society? Is he going to stick around and be nice to the kid, or is he going to slap the kid around? Is he going to be violent? I don't want that. I want a man who's going to have commitment, who's going to stay here, and who's going to be nurturing. He's going to take care of the kid, who's going to provide for the family and provide for the community. That's why they want alpha males. The guy in charge of the community, well, there's nobody more committed to the community than the guy that's running the whole show. So women are all the things they need to raise the child for reproduction, all have to do with stable societies. There's a view, Steven Pinker's going to push this view that as women have gotten more and more involved in politics and governments across the world, societies have not just become more productive, more prosperous, they become more peaceful. That there's just less violence across the board the more you get women into governance. And it's a very, very strong evidence supporting this. The evidence supports this is a reality. But then you ask, what's going on? Well, it's because women want policies that are always pro-society, pro-people, pro-stability. And so the more women are involved, the more they're stabilizing society. We're seeing this now at a global level too. So clearly what it means to be a woman, yes, it's reproduction, but it's really about preserving society. Like guys are just as happy to overthrow society, because for a guy needs to become the alpha male. And so anything that might allow a guy to become alpha male is okay. So tearing society apart, that's why, poorer men, and we're seeing this in America right now, the less prosperous you are, the more you want revolution. Because if everything turns to anarchy, well, at least you've now got a chance to rise. If you've got a very stable society, you're never going to topple the guy on top. I mean, this is what Russia and China are trying to do. How can they top? America's on top. How can they topple them? That's what they're concerned with. But women, opposite. just want it to be stable, everybody to get along. They want the people around them to be nurturing and supportive and all of that.
Can you rewrite that wall at the climbing gym in terms of what, like, I feel most like a woman when to celebrate, like, the stability, nurturing aspects of womanhood? Like, do you buy that, first of all? And second of all, like, could you imagine some statements?
I feel most like a woman when I politically diffuse the threat of thermonuclear war
Hell
between
yeah.
world powers.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's like I
think it could be beautiful. I think it'd be really beautiful to see a wall of I feel most like a woman and I feel most like a man, and see the positive attributes of each one side by side.
I feel most like a man when I incite violent revolution that topples the wealthy.
No, it would be like I don't buy that, first of all.
Guys, sign off on that.
Yeah, I don't think that at all. I think it would be more like when I stand up for my family, or, you know, when I'm courageous and do, you know, blah, 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 that kind of thing. When I encourage other young men to, you know, make the most of themselves.
But I'm kind of like, look, I can, that statement of I encourage young men to make the most of themselves. I stand up for my family. I'm like, how is that not something that a woman does? How is it not something that a man does, that he negotiates down the threat of thermonuclear war?
Yeah, it's
like,
tricky.
all of these things I can find embodied in men and women. And I can find, like, again, we're talking about the idea that the male goal is to rise to be alpha. And so there's this willingness to sacrifice society in order to do that. And I'm like, and yet there's men who don't do that, right? Because there's within the man, there's also this thing of like, okay, well, I enjoy intellectual pursuits and I like a stable society and I like to be able to, you know, play music or write my books or do whatever. And so I don't want to topple things. And that breaks the differentiating lines that we've drawn. And so when I look at all of these, I can bin both men and women into almost all categories. And the only thing that remains at the essence of it is literally the womb.
Or sex itself, right? The men, they want to just impregnate the women and run away. Like, that's a fundamental fixation.
I just have to say, though, that first is individual variation, but also we can rise above our biology. I mean, that's the story of humanity for the past few hundred years, is that we rise above our biology. And so there are now more enlightened men, more developed women. And we're all interacting and we're part of a society. So there certainly is a lot more variance, and not every guy anymore is trying to be an alpha. That's true, but that's a result of our culture imposed over the biology. The default still across the world, look at Putin in Russia and Xi in China. I mean, they both want the country to be subservient to them, and they both want women in their roles, and they're trying to create a society that's back, you know, in their minds back in the good old days where men and women had clear separate roles and the guys are in charge, and those societies are getting aligned that way. I mean, that's pretty much the story of every dictator. Every dictator is a man who wants to be the alpha, subjugate everyone, and wants the whole society to reflect these traditional conservative values, these biological values, I guess. So
I mean, you could say the same thing about like almost every great democratic spiritual leader as well. I mean, I don't think that it's just like men are bad. Like, there's every single great advance from the Enlightenment onward was also these very competent men that led reform movements and so forth. It's not just like all men who rise to power are tyrannical or something like that. But it's like, I think what you're getting at is...
I think that's what Ogi's saying. That all men are tyrannical.
I'm saying this is the biological impulse, which we can overcome with culture. But that is the biological impulse in men, and will always will be. We can create, and we are creating all kinds of cultural things to mitigate that. I mean, this is now American politics, right? The Republicans think.
But that's not even the case with chimps. Like, the meanest chimp isn't the one that stays alpha for very long. The chimp that is able to get along with the most other top dog chimps and can actually be friendly and involve himself in feeding the other chimps and taking care of them, and that's the one that stays on top the longest. It's a competence thing.
Well,
it's
this is
a dominance thing.
Oh, but aren't you basing this off of like a single Netflix documentary?
Not entirely. I mean, I've read a bit. I mean, it seems like that is not the full story.
I will accept that it's not the full story, right? So basically the premise is that there is some aspect of dominance, but there's also an aspect of cooperation and
Competence.
Absolutely. There's a famous book by Franz de Waal called Chimpanzee Politics. To be the alpha, you have to be cunning and political as well. So a dominance hierarchy, it's not that you rise to the top because you're dominating. It's that whoever's on top dominates the others, and whoever's on the next level dominates those below them. By dominate mean control. The alpha male gets the food first and gets the women first. And if another male chimp wants those things, he'll beat them or attack them or punish them in some way and not let him have it. So that's the dominance. But to maintain that position, you absolutely need political savvy. Chimpanzee politics.
Yeah, you have to take care of
men will do whatever they can to become an alpha. It's not just a pure strength thing. Strength comes into it, especially at the lower scales. You don't need to be strong to rule the United States or China, for example. You don't need a big, strong man. But if you're leading a tribe in the Amazon, maybe you do need to be stronger and bigger than some of the other men. So that's context too. But in American society, being strong, and being physically big or powerful is not much of an advantage to climbing to the top. You have to have intelligence and cunning and relationships and all that sort of stuff. But that's all the same to a man. Whatever man needs to do to get to the top is what he's going to do.
And yet, what he needs to do, in some sense, is embrace those attributes of stability and so forth that we try to attribute to women. It just seems to me like...
To some degree, I think that you need to have a culture that deeply values female preferences in order for that to be the case. Because if you have a culture where female preferences for stability and gentleness are not valued, you don't end up getting men who pursue that sort of vision for the world, right? Like you can imagine a really hardened, like Genghis Khan. Like I was listening to somebody talk about Genghis Khan the other day. These dudes were...
How about just Saudi Arabia?
I don't know enough about yes, like, oh, they're like, is it Saudi Arabia or in Iran? There's like been a ton of protests where women are protesting headscarves, and the morality police are arresting them and beating them into comas. And then, like, that doesn't seem like a culture where there's a particular influence of the women on the men to create a more gentle and nurturing society. It's a very top-down dominant society. And so I think that you have to have this, what Ogi's saying, the transcendence of the biological impulses, where, like, you always talk about humans as time machines. And so there is an impulse, and instead of paying attention to the most basic, darkest biological impulse, you aim for something that is better, something that is higher, because you believe that it is your job to transcend those dark forces that stir at the heart of man.
Yeah, well, it just makes you happier too.
Probably. I don't know. I think Genghis Khan was probably pretty happy. I think that, like, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is probably pretty happy. Like,
yeah, MBS.
I doubt it.
Anastasia, you make an excellent point that Shilo, I think, kind of you were eliding past, is that women are very good for democracies and democracies are very good for women. All these talks about how men, you're mentioning how men need to be more well-rounded and softer. In our democracies, in our Western democracies, where women have managed to have a big role and be connected and shape the culture and influence. You go to dictatorships, which is most of the world through most of history, it's always a guy at the top, and that guy, to preserve his power, wants to preserve the traditional generals and doesn't give women a lot of authority. And women don't have a lot of authority in Iran or in Russia, or in China. They had some in China, but with the Xi, as she's gone up, all the women have gone out. So this is very typical.
And yet men still...
We're seeing the well-rounded men in democracies because there are a lot of women, and women's values are circulating. Women have a chance here.
And yet the men still innovated and championed the democracies in the first place.
Yes, a cabal of men who got to run that new society as alpha males. Yes, every one of them.
That's a really revolutionary idea.
Formed America were ended up being a president or the cabinet or some kind of powerful position. So kind of, they were benevolent, but they were still alpha males, very concerned with their power. I mean, even George Washington. Yes, what
The idea they would
what
even let citizens vote, though. I mean, this is really revolutionary. This is
we didn't at first. We always forget that the founders were terrified of this, and the senators were not elected by popular vote when they did it. Because they were terrified. State legislators elected them, and they didn't let people elect the justices of the Supreme Court. The only thing that they were electing was the president and the House of Representatives. So
I was just thinking of
great
really
steps.
ancient history, like Athenian democracy. And
Oh,
I was
I
just
see.
thinking, even before that, just the idea that you would even give your advisors a vote, period. Like that you would even give any power away. That's a really revolutionary, radical idea. And that definitely came from men, as far as I can tell. And that's a very stabilizing decision.
Okay, the idea in history and this is like a very feminist read of history, is that the men are influenced by women behind the scenes. And so how can you tell that it's from the mind of men rather than from the minds of the women that are behind those men? Because all those men are paired,
It may
right?
very well. I mean, also the roots of ancient Greece, maybe in the Minoan culture, which was potentially a matriarchal society, right? It's like, I don't know, like maybe that played into it heavily too. It's hard to say.
We are delighted to announce that Demysticon 2024, our very first scientific conference, is officially launched, and you can buy tickets right now at the link in the description and also in the link that is up in either this corner or this corner. We are going to gather in Austin, Texas on April 7th and 8th of 2024 for 2 days of talks on consciousness, mythology, archaeology, solar physics, hypnosis, and much, much more. Buy tickets now up at this link. I have a feeling that not everybody should vote. And I say that even about myself. Like, we live in this town, and we are not going to stay in this town. And I get sent ballots for decisions that will change the course of not this town, but this county for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And I'm like, I should not have a say in that. I will suffer no consequences for making a totally ill-informed, bad for the community choice. I am not integrated in the community. I don't know anybody. There's people here that have lived on farms for 6 generations.
I mean, the good news is that it doesn't seem like voting actually changes the outcome of policies, so it doesn't really matter, it seems like.
I think it really does on the local level, right? Because it's things like, will we increase taxes to pay for the sheriff's department so they can get another one of those like man-crushing bus vans? Will we legalize drugs? What are we going to do with the homeless encampment downtown? Like, these are things that matter for the town, and it definitely will change the policy because they'll vote for something that will.
But those things seem to matter on the grander scale too, right? Like, do you want to see more man-crushing police vehicles in the world? Do you think those are necessary or useful? Do you think that drugs should be, like, do you think that the government should have control over people's minds like that? Like, those are big questions that seem to influence, you could vote on anywhere and still have an effect.
But I really believe that.
Tax policy is,
Well, with like drugs, I feel like it's legitimate for a group of people to say, we don't want people to be able to use that here.
Why?
Because we don't like the culture that it brings. Like, we have a place here, we have a culture, we don't like what that stuff brings. We don't like the people who do it. If you don't like that, go somewhere else. I'm like, I think that has to be a legitimate organization of society, because as much as I think that it should be legal to consume whatever substances you want, and clearly the state of Oregon has voted that everything's decriminalized, I still think that what we're doing is we're creating this universal culture that gets spread out onto the world where it's like, no. There's a state ordinance that says all substances are decriminalized and you can't do anything about it. And that means that your community that has values that are antithetical to these substances can no longer protect themselves against the infiltration of people who do things that you don't like.
What do you mean? You just don't let them into your group?
But they'll vote to change the society around you, right? Like, because we live in this interconnected democracy, and the person who's down the street, like, if the person who's down the street from you has a stronger culture than you, you will be eradicated from your own home. And so if somebody shows up because there's cheap land or there's cheap housing or they're an economic migrant and they come with cultural preferences that are antithetical to yours, they can they can drive you out of a place where your family's been for like 150 years. And I'm like, is that fair? Is that right? Is that just?
That's the story of the whole world, right? Everybody's been driven off their land for every 100 years or so.
Yeah, but and usually that comes down to like armed conflicts. Like people will go to war with each other to prevent that from happening. And I'm like, if you can prevent it from happening by just being like, well, okay, you don't want this here, you don't have to have it here.
One of the great strengths of what we have here in America is the federalization, the fact that we've got a national government, we got states governments, we got county governments, we got local governments. There's so many governments, and they're all intermeshed and they're all entangled in different ways. It's a wonderful, beautiful complexity. And that's exactly what you want, because that prevents any one dominant power from just taking off and taking over everything. It just slows everything down. I mean, this was the greatest defense against Trump and the insurrection, is that, and trying to overthrow the election. It's just so complicated. You know, if it was all centralized in one thing, you know, if all we had was Congress, then it would have been a lot easier. But you've got so many local bureaus, you know, community, even at the community level, community leaders, civil leaders, county leaders, city leaders, you know, city governments. That's another one. All of this, and this entanglement is beautiful. So even if you're making a decision, hey, the people down the road from you, you don't like, maybe they're doing drugs, you don't do drugs, and you don't like that. Well, you can have a chance to go to the state level. Maybe you can change it at the state. You know, maybe you can change it nationally. You know, always have some kind of opportunity or some hope to do it that way. And that's why, and it's very hard to make very big changes. And that's probably a good thing. It makes us a creative society. We can handle creativity. We can experiment at any level. A city can experiment and do something absolutely crazy, vote for something absolutely nuts, but not take down the country. And then, you know, like Detroit, you know, Detroit made some very bad decisions. That city collapsed. And now they're getting supported and slowly building back up again without destroying the rest of us. You know, it's not a chain reaction, you know, and that happens everywhere. And that's one of the great benefits. You know, in China, it's completely different. You know, there's no separation from the top and the bottom. You know, what holds at the top is going to hold for everyone all the way. And so your opportunities for change or to do something are zero. That's why there's so much frustration and malaise in China right now. But, you know, here, even if you lose the local election, there's always something you can do besides, you know, moving. You can move too, but.
And like with respect to drugs, the local laws seem to be the ones that hold sway. Like it's, yeah, you can possess drugs in Oregon, but not according to the federal government, right? If for some reason you have a run-in with a federal agent, you're still in trouble. So the local laws can contradict, the state laws can even contradict the federal governments in practice.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess that's
a wonderful, beautiful thing. I mean, this is
for sure.
What is special about America past the democracy, the fact that we have these different levels, and there should be tension. It's good. It's good that one level wants one thing and another. Like tension is always productive as long as it doesn't turn to violence and you know, doesn't go into dark areas. As long as you maintain and manage that competition, that's what gives us our strength. You take that away, you get Russia or China is what you get.
Mm.
I wonder, though, if there isn't a push towards a unification of culture that's driven by the internet a little bit. Like you were saying that when we were talking about the early days of internet pornography, you had all of these different places, all of these different fetishes and ways to explore those fetishes. Now everything is centralized onto the tube sites, and there's a unification of culture. And I think
you know what, Anastasia? You just hit on something I never thought about. Just thinking about it, it's huge. It's the fact that social media is absolutely fragmentizing us. We are not becoming globalized. We're descending into ever more local, dynamic communities. You know, it's the utter fragmentation of the world is what social media is doing. But you're right. It's the opposite in porn. Porn is becoming homogenized and globalized. And so what you just said, why is that? I think it's because social media, it's everybody interacting with everybody, but porn, it's top down. Like you go on these sites, but you're not interacting with other people. You know, there's a little bit of that on the fan fiction sites. Women interact a little more, but the more interaction, the further from sex. You know, like the more it's just down and dirty sex. Even women don't talk about that with other women as much. So basically, our erotica is all top down, and when I guess that's the cause of globalization. When you have top down, that's not getting any lateral dynamics are feedback dynamics. The only feedback is the clicks and the purchases. But social media is the ultimate lateral. It's ultimate. That person and that person. I'll talk to this and I'll share that. Oh, and what that I like what that person says. I don't like what that person says. And so it forms networks and communities. Wow, there's a beautiful. I didn't even think of a beautiful illustration of the difference between network and top down. Is that our sexuality is absolutely becoming homogenized, and it wasn't the first decade. It was the Wild West because everybody brought their thing, and it was more like social media. In fact, there was a lot more contact. Now that I think about it, you might have your own website, like Fart Fantasy. That was the very first porn site I looked at when I started doing the research formally as our research project. And that, I remember thinking, well, this is not going to be as easy as I imagine. Because I got to look at this stuff. I got to read this stuff. I got to watch this stuff. So, but Fart Fantasy, whoever came up with that site, turned on by farts. It says, oh, here Amy's got a buttload of methane to spray on you. I remember the line. Like that. So that was a person. They might go and find a community of other fart fetishes, other fart sites. They might form a little network, the fart network. I mean, there was a lot of stuff like that in those days, but that's all gone. That's been annihilated by this homogenization. But in our social media world, it is the opposite. Everybody wants to get in laterally. They want to have their own group. Nobody wants to be homogenous. Nobody wants Elon Musk to be in charge of it, right? Everybody. That was the end of Twitter. Nobody wants it to be one guy's playing field. We want to feel it's an open community where we can go in any direction and do anything we want. Yeah.
Do you think there's any connection to this with the homogenization of scientific worldview, where it seems like increasingly so since the Enlightenment, there's one tolerable scientific perspective on any given theoretical subject matter until it dies, and people jump on board. Like the idea of consensus is so important to people. Do you think that has to do with the reorganization of information flow and this top versus decentralized interactions?
I think there are some deep flaws in human science that are unappreciated by practicing scientists, and especially in physics. I think physics has painted itself into a corner that doesn't even understand that it's a corner it's gotten into. But what I was going to say about that, this is something very interesting to me, and I don't have the answers. I'd love to talk about this, but I think in science, a lot of it's sort of a different kind of thing. Social media is any idea at any time about any new thing. I mean, that's the pleasure of social media. You see people doing things you've never seen before. Like a lobster man can suddenly become a viral star, showing how he catches lobster, something you've never seen before. I don't have any preconceived notions about what that is. But science is different because we've got a tradition, especially in physics. Newton, nobody's going to throw out Newton. He was anchored there. If you want to be part of physics, you've got to respect and accept Newton as, the cornerstone of all this. And then Einstein, how can you do physics without agreeing with Einstein? So it's sort of like this knowledge base. If you want to become part of, like a religion, if you want to be part of this community, yeah, absolutely. If you want to be part of this religion, you must believe these things. If you believe something different, it's not. They're saying that's not science. You're being unscientific, but you're really just not being part of that community.
That tradition.
Yeah,
that's a tradition.
I feel this strongly in mind science. I think Stephen Grossberg at Boston University, figured out the mind. He figured out the math of the mind massively on a scale like quantum physics and relativity together. That's what Stephen Grossberg did. And yet the tradition in mind science, from Freud to behaviorism to neuroscience, Steve's work doesn't fit into that. It's quite different. Mind science's history is shit. Freud, shit. Behaviorism, shit. Cognitive science, Chomsky and Steven Pinker, shit. Even neuroscience today, at least we got good technology, but there's no coherence to it all, and nobody's trying to be coherent. And there's no way for Stephen Grossberg to get into that. It's so monolithic in this bad stuff.
So but what do you make it? Like, what is that a displacement of religion into secular society? Like, why is it that we would be more and more open due to social media and so forth to all of these little niche ideas and this almost free market of worldview in the modern landscape? But then in science, it's closing and closing. It's like the tunnel is always narrowing, ever narrowing, and this pantheon is more and more important, and the tradition becomes more and more important. Like it's very
So,
orthogonal to what's happening in the rest of the world.
science is more of an oligarchy because there's journals and grant givers, especially the National Institute of Science and National Institute for Mental Health in my field. Um, there's big, huge top-down individuals and institutions that have such an outsized role in it. You don't find that in social media. There's no guerrilla of social media except for people that have a lot of followers. But there's no institution that's dominating social media. But if you want to get published in Nature, for Nature or Science, which gives you, the vanity journals that give you a big platform, you have to play by the rules. If you don't submit it in the way they want and talk about the things you want, and most importantly, cite all the people you want. That is the number one way everybody's kept in line in sciences. You gotta cite people, even if you don't think their work's any good or you don't think they should be cited. You won't get published if you don't cite the people that are considered to be the top of the field, which just propagates whoever that is. So there's a lot of factors that makes it narrow and top heavy. Makes it top heavy.
I actually have a social read on this. What were you going to say?
I just was going to reiterate that it's fascinating that you don't the people with a lot of followers outside of science, they don't submit themselves to a larger society. Like there's no legion of those people. Like they don't have a society of people, but the scientists are all subservient to an institutional allegiance.
Wait, what do you mean? I'm not totally
like
sure.
In science, the people who have the most followers, the biggest scientists, they're all subservient to, say, Nature magazine or to the National Academy of Sciences or to their professional hierarchy, whatever. The people who are just independent, on, like, let's say, big social media stars, big YouTubers, big podcasters, they're not necessarily like linked together in the same way that they're under some institutional umbrella in the same way.
They're all on YouTube?
To cut to the heart of it, it's about purpose. There's no purpose in social media. It's just a free for all. It's like the ocean. But science is a supermind. It has a purpose. It's trying to understand physical reality the same as any brain. And so it's the dynamics in science are very much the same as the dynamics are in our own mind. Not the case in social media. Social media is not oriented towards something. Social media is not trying to get us to the moon. Social media is not trying to figure out nuclear fusion. It's just a bunch of people having their days and interacting. It's a community, not a supermind.
Hold on. I think that the goal of social media is to settle culture. Like, I think that that's why people talk about the culture wars on social media, because it very much is a place where people are trying to figure out what is right and what is wrong. Like, how much time do you spend on social media?
I think it's mostly people sharing their photos and events with other people. Moms sharing photos of their kids and looking at other kids, and
definitely used to
dads sharing their golf.
How much time do you guys spend on like TikTok and Twitter and?
So I'm on all of those, but a lot of them are youth oriented, and that's what gets the most coverage and attention. But the population, the numbers, are older people that just get on and share stuff. I mean, that's the heart of social media. It's, there's young people that go on and promote their views. They're active in it, but that's not what made Mark Zuckerberg rich. It's just ordinary people sharing stuff with their local community.
I saw this New York Times piece recently that was saying that was kind of a dying fashion. Like the youth were a lot of lurkers who basically use social media to go to their favorite influencers.
It's like watching television. It's like it used to be that social media was a place where everybody would post, and now it's a place.
Most of my students, when I talk to them, they don't post; they just lurk. They just watch. They spend a lot of time on Instagram, but they're not putting pictures of themselves on Instagram.
No, it's just scrolling. And so I guess I spend a decent amount of time on Twitter. It's like I've always had an addiction to reading something on the internet. Like when I was a kid, the first place that I was at was like the Something Awful forums. And then there was this forum for a comic strip that I read. And then there were blogs. And then there were just every single age that I've been, there's always been something. Like it scratches some deep fundamental part of my brain. And now it's Twitter, because Twitter is this thing that it's just this constant stream of information. And you're right that it's kind of died in the last 6 months or so after Musk took over. But it's really a place where people are fighting over what is the future of the culture from everything that I can see. And I think that there are places where it's not, but I think that the people who are running OpenAI, I think the people like Elon Musk, the people who are massively influential on pop culture, they're all on there and they're all taking sides on cultural issues, whether it's Israel and Palestine, whether it's the role of women and men, whether it's red pill culture, black pill culture, whatever. All of these things are being played out, and these massive figures are participating in shifting the tides and the currents. And it seems like it's deeply isolated on the internet. And yet it also gets exported to college campuses. And in college campuses, those are the places where it's the portal from the internet into the real world, because it's all these young people that are getting all of this stuff off the internet. And now they're actually associating in real life and taking action and getting educated into these processes of, direct democracy and everything else. And so I think that it's not just people sharing pictures of cats. I think it's very much a place where people are fighting for the heart and soul of what is. And I think the reason that science is so shuttered is because science is about what is true. And if you can control the scientific discourse, then you have an edge in the culture war, because the bottom line is what the science says. We saw this. I trust in science. I believe in science. That's not incidental. It's a tool for being able to tell people that you have arrived at the foundational understanding of the universe and your side is right. And it used to be God. Like, you used to be able to point to God and say, like, look at the text. The scripture says so and so. You got to do this. And now the scriptures are kind of antiquated mythologies, but the science is very, very real.
I mean, I think you're absolutely correct that these political values or cultural values are certainly getting shared, and they go off social media and come into real life. I just don't think that's the bulk of social media. For example, I'm friends with some Brazilian immigrants, so they don't have a lot of money. Like about 10 of them live in a house together, good friends of mine. And they are on TikTok, and they've got their videos get millions of followers all the time. And they just post videos of their family, of their Brazilian kids talking in Portuguese, running around the house. They don't have any political interests whatsoever. They just talk about their day. They talk about cooking. They talk about, the party they just had in their backyard. And that's 90% of social media. I mean, you get people on the political end, and they get the most coverage because they make it into the newspapers, and we join those topics. But the heart of it, like what's sustaining it,
those people get millions of views for talking about their barbecue.
Yep.
Really?
Do you know what the comments are like?
Shocking to me.
We're in it reminds them of their own family. It's like, so these are, in this case, it's Brazilians. These are Brazilians who immigrated from Sao Paulo to Boston, and they work construction jobs, blue collar kinds of jobs, but they're very happy. And they just talk about everyday stuff from their life. Like, they weren't even trying to get 1 million followers. They just were sharing this mostly with each other. They put it on TikTok, and they were all looking at it among themselves. And just one of their videos somehow went viral. And ever since that, and then it got 1 million views, and then it got on TV in Brazil. And then after that, they've got a huge following. And it's just ordinary, everyday stuff. There's no political message. They're not trying to be comedic. I mean, they're funny, but they're not like setting up jokes or anything. They just say ordinary stuff. I mean, that's what most viral heroes are. I just mentioned this lobster guy. I just saw this lobster guy got famous. He's not advocating a political view. He's just showing what it's like to catch lobsters in Massachusetts, and got a big following. I mean, that's the real nature of it. Is people are looking for people like themselves. They want things. They want to look other babies. If you've got a kid with autism, you want to find other families that have autism. You want to find other people that are sharing the same things you're sharing, not just the politics, but just like the basic everyday life stuff. That's what social media is. It's a great forum for the politics, and politics are moving through it in all these ways. But I don't think that's the heart of it. If you took away all those Brazilian immigrants and those sorts of people, I don't think you'd have social media anymore.
That's probably true, because you need to have a critical mass of people that are participating in it. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Like, this is the problem of Twitter, right? Because you have a network that demands a certain amount of throughput. And so there has to be enough people that are posting things that there's stuff for you to read when you come on or you won't stick. And so now as users have gone down, this is more of a problem. So I think you're exactly right that if you were to remove a lot of that, there wouldn't be anything to watch. And I think that you are right that there's a lot of stuff that is just this daily reflection of life. But I still wonder if that isn't political at heart, because it's a reflection. We seem to be at a point where people are really trying to decide what the future should look like socially, culturally. I mean, we always are, right? And now we're at this juncture where we have the technologists and the accelerationists that are pushing for this. Do you know this Brian Johnson guy who's trying to live forever?
No.
So he's a billionaire. He started a company called Blueprint, which he is trying to reverse his biological age using supplements and diet and exercise and various therapies. And he's kind of a darling of the Kurzweilian
techno-futurists.
There's a name, the Singularity.
Singularity.
Yeah. And so he's on the forefront of that. And so there's this entire realm of people that are organizing around that because they want that to happen. And then there's another part that says, no, we should have big families, we should live in multi-generational households, and we should remain terrestrial creatures not governed by intelligence and AI and everything else. And so you see these people cleaving, and so I feel like the reason that people are interested in watching A Charming Family is because it reiterates their political preferences for that being the way that life looks. Because I doubt that the people who are obsessed with immortality are the ones that are watching that Brazilian family, like, right? Like there's a cleavage here, and I think it's interesting.
Yeah, you're right. Even if it's not explicitly, intentionally political, it is political. It's just saying, hey, I'd rather spend time looking at other families like my own than have to read about futurists and singularity and that politics. Rather than deal with the politics, I just want, I like living my life in my home. I don't care about the big stuff. I want videos about dogs that are like my dog. I want other, Dachshund videos like my Dachshund. I want other cockatoo videos because I got a cockatoo. Yeah, we want that kind of connection, but it is a political act, right? Like saying, look, all I want is just friendly videos from people like me doing nice things that I can relate to. Like I don't want to hear, about the Israeli, Palestinian conflict. I want to hear about a dog.
Do you think that science is just something that's fundamentally divorced from the average person's interest set? Like,
yes,
people just fundamentally, for the most part, don't really care how things work. They just want them to work.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, at this point.
The expression on your face as you say that.
Yeah, it's a little. I really don't want to admit that that's the case either.
You guys, this is like, I think about this all the time. Like the ideas that Shilo and I spend our time thinking about, I'm like, you could probably fill maybe a subway car with people who are also interested in them, maybe two, but like you can't get a full train.
The success of Lex Friedman or Andrew Huberman, who have millions of people that tune into the science.
Okay, so Huberman is very much, this is the science of how to live better. These are the biochemical pathways that you will affect by going outside and looking at the sun for 10 minutes first thing every morning. And then afterwards, you will wait 1 hour exactly until you have your first cup of coffee. And these are the supplements that you're going to add to your cup of coffee. And these are the biochemical pathways that are going to be affected by those supplements. And I am a Stanford professor, and you can trust me.
But is Lex like that?
No, Lex is not about science. Lex is about love and compassion. And he's all about, how are we going to be good people and solve the massive problems of the world? And I hope this conversation helps you live better and connect to people. And he does some science in association with that, but he's not a technical podcast. Like the technicals, like Huberman is really boring to me because it feels like being in lecture again. Like I took those classes in college and I hated every single minute of sitting through them. And I cannot imagine doing it again. And so I listened to a Huberman podcast and I just have flashbacks to just sitting in this windowless room being like, my life is going to end in this kind of room. And that's not good. What do you make of it? You want people to be super interested in science?
I mean, of course. I guess it makes me feel like a freak that I'm interested in. I want to know how things work. I mean, honestly, anybody who's listening to this show wants to know how things work too. We're all in this same project together. So that I hate to think that it's this tiny withering minority of people that are interested, because in some sense, I think that's the most difficult, and I guess that's the most tyrannical aspect of science, is that if nobody cares about it, then of course it's subject to all the corruptions of power that we should expect to happen, because nobody's paying attention. So
I think the single biggest problem is that the social structure of science no longer works for the state of science that we've reached. Peer-reviewed journals, tenured professorships in academic institutions, grants. You have to constantly write grants. The incentives are just all wrong now. Like, all the incentives are not towards discoveries, are not towards collaboration. The incentives, publishing papers and rising up the ladder, and that just doesn't suit the world we have now. The science. This is it's still basically a medieval system of academics, of scholarship, that's still structuring science. So I just think I don't know what it should look like, but I know I feel hampered.
It's very new.
All the structure that's there it hurts rather than helps.
This is all very new. This is post-World War II science for the most part. This structure that we're talking about, this peer review concept, this careerism, this is very new. And obviously the circumstances that provided for the old way of doing science are no longer applicable either, right?
If you're an eccentric billionaire, you can still do whatever the hell you want. Like, there's nothing stopping you from being like the next.
Well, you're probably
Tesla.
busy making your billions, but maybe your kids could actually do.
Yeah, old money.
Yeah, old money. All the original science was old money.
Also, priests. Like, Mendel was a priest or monk. He basically was like, I want to devote myself to intellectual life, and became a monk because that was where you went in order to do that. One of the guys who was a forefather of modern atomism, who basically Pierre Gassendi. He was a priest of the Roman Catholic Church in the 1500s who he found a way to take Epicurus's writings about atomism, where he was like, there's no such thing as an immortal soul, it's all just atoms bumping up against each other, which was very heretical, and Gassendi basically rewrote it to make it more palatable for people so that they could start thinking about atomism. But he was a priest. He knew he wanted to dedicate himself to thought, and so he went into the priesthood, and they gave him money. And
when people go into science when they're kids, people go to grad school, they have this dream. I know a lot of these people personally who went to grad school and thought, oh, it's going to be like this monastic experience. I'm going to get to study nature. And it's like, no, you're in the career pipeline now, buddy.
Yeah.
You're in the funding pipeline. And it's very heartbreaking. We lost kids because of that.
It's like
in the trenches,
That is so dramatic. I don't know. I don't know how it could be any other way. Like, I don't think that it can be any other way.
I think those wealthy billionaires are something to look at, actually. I think that's really interesting. It's like, if there was some wealthy billionaires who actually took an interest in science, they could probably is the right word, patronize? They could support, researchers that were outside of that superstructure. That's certainly a steam valve. Like, that could potentially lead to some innovation in the future. I hope.
Corporations do have research departments, and so there is some independence from the academic science community and the corporate world. The government world, there are some government labs. Again, always overlap with the academia, but if they're classified sorts of systems, and it has its own sealed off community.
Its own incentive structures too, right? Like, they're all oriented towards progressive product development, technological implementation. It's not really like, let's understand how the universe works. It's like, let's figure out how to manipulate the universe for our product.
Probably Bell Labs in New Jersey was the last corporate research that was really doing truly basic research. That's where they heard the cosmic, the sound of the Big Bang, for example, got a Nobel Prize.
It was an accident, though. Yeah.
Complete accident, yes.
I don't think they were trying to, study the cosmos.
None of it. I don't know why they got the Nobel. Just, I think, ridiculous they got a Nobel. But makes me confused about the meaning of the Nobel. But yeah, so that.
Can you say more about that?
What's that?
Can you say more about that?
Oh, because it was they weren't looking for. They didn't know about the microwave cosmic background radiation. They weren't looking for the origins of the Big Bang. They just built a big new radio antenna, and they were trying to figure out where they built the biggest radio antenna so far in Homedale, New Jersey, and they kept hearing a background noise, and they kept thinking it's something mechanical, and they thought it was like pigeon poop. And I know they got in there and cleaned out the pigeon poop, and they did all these things trying to get a clear signal, and they couldn't figure it out. So they went to a physicist at Princeton, I think. I'm not sure. I know they went to a physicist, and the physicist came and looked, and he said, "I think you're listening to the sound of the Big Bang." So they didn't even like make that jump. They brought in a guy who made that jump, and then they all shared the Nobel Prize. Like, what the guys that were cleaning out the pigeon poop, what do they do that deserve a Nobel Prize? They took it away from somebody who may have spent their life pursuing something in science and figured it out. So yeah, is the Nobel Prize just because you got lucky one day and hit the lottery? Yeah. It's just I don't understand the meaning. To me, that is always a lot of the Nobel, but that's a big one.
He wanted it to be about innovations that would improve the well-being of humanity, right? The well-being of humans across the globe. I think that's what he envisioned the money being set. He was deeply guilt-ridden for having invented dynamite, essentially.
Yeah.
And so he wanted to offer some supplement to that and reward people who had improved humanity's lot. Yeah, and it's hard to make a case for this, CMB business or anything about the Big Bang really improving people's lot on Earth.
It's a great discovery, but what are we honoring?
Maybe.
Exactly? That this accident happened, and that these two men. I met one of the guys, and he was an arrogant prick. Like he treated it like he had earned a Nobel. Like that it wasn't. I kept thinking like he's acting like he's one of the great scientists of the world, just this pompous. And of course, I'm keep thinking, well, you cleaned out pigeon poop to get your antenna to work like that. What were you? You didn't make you couldn't even figure it out. You had to go talk to a physicist, and the physicist figured it out. You didn't figure it out. So
it's kind of it's a sketchy piece of science by itself too, which we don't have to go into. But it's also sketchy how it came out. Like they published the finding and they published the interpretation. That paper with the collaboration with the physicists, I think we're saying is at Princeton. Don't hold me to that. That came out in the next. It was like in the same journal. What?
It was like 6 months later.
It wasn't in the same volume?
I don't think so.
I think it was. I think it's the next paper in the same volume.
We looked at this recently. It's not that close. It's very close, but it's not. It's not like one after another. There's like. I don't have the computer. I can't even look it up.
We forgot.
Anyways, close enough. Like they were very close to each other.
It was just like a very quick turnaround from like, hey, we saw this thing to being like, okay, this is definitely what it is. And they just moved on. And like so much cosmological science is built on the back of that. And there's some serious issues with that interpretation. So
is that right? No, I wouldn't know about that.
Well, I mean, the whole thing hinges on this idea that a black, so you know about black bodies?
Mm-hmm.
Radiation? Yeah, so like when they did all these experiments, particularly, these late 19th century scientists did a bunch of experiments where they heated up.
Kirchhoff and Bunsen.
They were definitely at the heart of it. There was Wien, also Stefan, Planck got involved in this, but they essentially were looking at the light that was produced from heated bodies, like solid bodies, and to some extent liquids were evaluated as well.
Gases too.
They played with gases, but they weren't able to develop the black body spectrum from gases. That's the critical part, is that no one has ever been able to show a black body spectrum, this continuous rainbow with this particular power density shape. No one's ever been able to pull that off with a gas, and yet the presumption is that the ionized gases at the beginning of the universe are somehow able to produce this perfect black body spectrum, which to me seems preposterous. And so this entire scientific landscape is built on this very bizarre interpretation of some 18th century science that was done in one particular setting with these soot-covered chambers and then extrapolated to the rest of the universe, because that's what the holy grail of physics was, to extrapolate your findings to the whole universe, right? To come up with these universal, like Newton, like you said, the universal law of gravitation. All bodies do this everywhere. And so people really wanted that. And so even though they weren't able to show it in the laboratory, they assumed it to be the case. And still to this day, no one's ever been able to manage to take a gaseous plasma, and create this black body spectrum in a laboratory. But they assume it's possible still, which is very bizarre. So it's kind of a sketchy piece of science to begin with, and then just how quickly it was championed and like you said, turned into a Nobel Prize, and it's a very strange piece of the puzzle. But it feeds into the
Yeah.
tradition really nice, right? It feeds really nicely into that Einsteinian Big Bang cosmology that was developed by Lemaitre, and it feeds into that tradition, right? It feeds in even into the Newtonian tradition. It's very interesting how it fits into the canon so perfectly, and that's probably why it got the prize.
Yeah, it was the smoking gun of the Big Bang. That's what it was. It was like the first proof, independent proof of the Big Bang. I'm sure that's why they gave the Nobel Prize. I mean, a big discovery. It's just, are you celebrating the discovery? Or are you celebrating, the two men that built something that they had no idea was going to end up detecting the Big Bang?
Well, they played an important role in the canon, I guess, is what it looks like to me.
Yeah,
They played a good. They were good old boys in the tradition of what was being celebrated, the pantheon of physics.
yeah, and they were physicists too. I mean, they weren't just technicians or something like that. I wonder if they had been technicians, like engineers, like if they had been engineers instead of physicists, who had built that, would they have still given them the Nobel? That would have been an interesting thing.
Like if they were just the technicians in the lab.
If they're just the techs. If it was the exact same story.
No, the techs would not have gotten that.
Yeah. Penzias, one of the guys was Penzias. He was a physicist, but let's just say he was a tech, just the tech guy there that built anything that needed to be built. He was the guy to build, and he built that antenna, and he's like, oh crap, it doesn't work. Here, gotta work on it. And then he eventually got to the physicist. Would they have given him the Nobel, or would they have just given it to the Princeton physicist? That's an interesting question.
I would go with the latter.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's just something. It's just so bizarre that physics even fits into that Nobel thing at the end of the day for me. Like, I understand it makes sense that engineering advances or medicine or something would fit into Alfred Nobel's idea of what the prize stood for, but even just scientific discoveries about the nature of the universe fitting into that it's just very misaligned. It's very interesting. It's also strange to reward somebody for like understanding for a theory of nature. It's like,
so that's actually a really interesting thing, because as soon as you stop giving something like the Nobel Prize for technology and instead you give it for a theoretical understanding of nature, then you have created an insane incentive structure, because you have had people in robes awarding medals, ceremonies, huge pomp and circumstance for like an interpretation of data.
It's like you're concretizing something that's supposed to be a dynamic process. Science is supposed to be this progressive thing where we understand nature better and better, but we never totally understand nature. We're just getting hopefully closer to it. But once you put these flags in the sand, not in the sand, in stone, it's like, how do you walk back on that?
This speaks to one of my own bugbears, that the universe, our reality, is way of mind and way of matter. Purpose and purposelessness, physics and mind science. These are two sets of dynamics operating in the universe, both creative dynamics, both creating things, both destructive dynamics, destroying things, both active change agents, both equally influential in reality. And yet, human science tradition is all physics. Mind science is something else. And having a Nobel Prize, just like we're exactly talking about, awarding, hearing cosmic sounds of Big Bang when this wasn't even the goal in this physics tradition, guys in robes standing around honoring that. What's not being honored? Consciousness, mind stuff, consciousness. What is more relevant for our daily life? The Big Bang and cosmic background radiation, or mental illness and human relationships and our soul, consciousness, our soul, language, these things. These are way more relevant to our
I think Alfred
life.
Nobel would be right there with you.
Exactly. And yet Nobel and our tradition writ large just keeps celebrating what physics is doing, as that's science. And those mind scientists they're tinkering around with something, but we all know it's really physics has got the holy grail. That's where it's going to be, when it's just not true. I mean, certainly.
I always thought it was bizarre. There's no prize for biology whatsoever.
Medicine.
Yep.
Well, there's medicine, but there's no biology.
Medicine, but yeah.
There's nothing about like fundamental biology, like understanding how the body works. It's like if you instrumentalize it and make it medical, but that's
Or
nothing like
about the
physics
mind,
book.
right? There should have been something about the mind from the start. I mean, Freud was super popular even when Nobel put this together. But like, I mean, what a bias, right? Physics and chemistry, but nothing to do with the mind or mental activity or purpose, or, evolution, about biology, none of that, and that's going to be locked in forever, unless they do Nobel does a change. But that just keeps reinforcing the idea that physics is the real science, and whatever's happening in the other fields, especially mind science, it's something lesser. I think, personally, I think consciousness is more important to understanding the universe than the Big Bang. Consciousness is how we understand the universe, how we perceive the universe, how we relate to the universe. We can't know the Big Bang without passing through consciousness. So if you just act like consciousness is some minor little oddity on the way, that the Big Bang is the great mystery, you just got the whole thing upside down. The whole thing upside down. I mean, personally, I don't think the universe began with the Big Bang. I think the universe began when purpose emerged, when the first mind whirl and the first mind on some pool or slime or magma or deep sea vent, that's when the universe began. Until then, time wasn't going in one direction. There was no reason for time to go in one direction. The big mystery about why was there a low entropy state. Why is that a mystery? If minds began the moment purpose began, time has no meaning without purpose. Famously, physics, the equation of physics, you can throw out time. Time can go backwards and forward, doesn't really matter. It matters in mind science. It matters for purpose. It matters for minds. You can't have a mind. You can't have purpose. You can't have any of that without time flowing in one direction. The only variable that physics and mind science has in common is time. There's no other overlap. It's just time. Purpose is creating time going in one way. Why was the Big Bang the past? Why was the Big Bang the origin? There's no mind there to process it. So what are we even talking about? Purpose began, temporal direction began when a mind formed on Earth, when a first mind whirl of sensor doer environment started whirling and whirling around and spinning itself out of random chaos into unidirectional purpose.
That makes perfect sense to me. I don't think there's anybody more confused about what time is than physicists. But what I was going to ask you is, don't you think that the project of humanities in general were originally there to address the role of consciousness and conscious interactions? Like it seems like sciences have been elevated over the humanities in the academic structure. Would you agree with that? And
only recently. That has not always been the case. I mean,
100%.
Certainly post World War II is when it started.
And post World War II is when this like techno-driven careerist science peer review world also was erected for the first time.
By the way, in service of this point, I think that it's the University of North Carolina system just announced that they would no longer be endowing any chairs in the humanities. The only chairs that would be endowed would be in the STEM fields.
There it is.
Happening everywhere. I mean, that's happening everywhere these days. That humanities are getting cut because people are like, I'm not going to get a job, so why bother? Which was always the case. It's just people used to feel that just having a college education was the value. Having a humanities education, that was the value. Now our society is like, I need the skills to get work and nothing else.
Well, I think
we're turning college into tech, VOTech.
I mean, it's like people pay $30,000 a year to go get a humanities education, and they're taking on debt. Like, there's a bunch of things that go with that. Like, if your humanities education was just a couple $1,000 a year,
it was integrated, right? Like, if the I had the privilege of going to this tiny little liberal arts school, and the humanities education was integrated, right? Like, you weren't getting out of that college without taking a serious serving of humanities alongside your sciences. And like, I was a neuroscience major in undergrad, but I didn't escape having tons of seminars where we're looking at interdisciplinary interactions, classics, psychology, art, music, everything, right? And I think that like that place for it in articulating your science understanding to the world is the role of humanities, maybe not like as its own end by itself.
Because if you cannot study consciousness with physics, then you have to have some kind of context through which to study it.
Art, literature,
right,
theater, whatever.
And it seems like most of the studies of consciousness now are focused on this really mechanistic, the neurons do this, we have a map of their interactions, we can approximate it inside of a digital neural network, and that will give rise to intelligence and open a new portal into consciousness, where the study of it through an experiential, spiritual state is kind of, I don't know, it just seems quaint.
I often say I learn more about consciousness, the physical dynamics of consciousness, from reading Borges, Argentinian short story author, than reading anything in science. You know, this writer Jorge Borges writes these. They're not science fiction, but they're kind of fantasies about the nature of reality, and
So good.
incredibly insightful. And just you can immerse yourself in it, and that helps you think about. For me, it helped me think about consciousness in a way that I never got from the sciences.
Yeah, you can like really learn how to live, right? It's like from a really good set of artists, you know, you really get, that's why I loved like folk music too. It's just like when I was growing up, it's just these raw and blues and like these raw stories of just tragedy and like what goes wrong when you behave a certain way. And like it just conveys this real sense of a roadmap for what not to do, what to do, you know, where to walk, how to get to where you want to go. There's just something really practicable about that, practicable about it.
Absolutely. Or like War and Peace, one of my favorite novels by Tolstoy. That's another one that it's so richly detailed about human interactions over such a broad scale. It just you come away understanding human nature and human psychology and human dynamics with a clarity and immediacy that you can never get from reading, you know, a psychology paper. Even if a psychology paper was saying the same points that Tolstoy made, Tolstoy's delivery, it gives you, you know, an experience, you know, an emotional, spiritual experience, not like an intellectual. Like Anastasia was just saying that, you know, this neuron does this and this does this, and so we'll map it to the digits. Yeah, that's one way, but you know, thinking about the human aspect, you know.
Why did you go into the more mechanistic, mathematical approach to understanding the mind, as opposed to going into, you know, a more art-based or humanities-based approach?
So they're both alive in me. I'm an artist as much as I am a scientist, and have always been and strive to be. I've always tried to bring every approach to consciousness. The reason math is so important. Well, first of all, I talk to extraterrestrials, and they share math with me, and I needed to match up the math they were sharing with me with some kind of human math. Like that would have been the easiest way to match them up. But also, here's the real value of taking a mathematical approach to the mind. It's the only way you can use the same equations, the same framework, the same conceptual framework to study what's happening inside a neuron and what's happening across a society. The dynamic, a person-to-person dynamics can be characterized mathematically in the same way as a neuron-to-neuron dynamic. So it's easy and natural to say, okay, here's how it works on this level. Does it work this way up on this level with the same dynamics, the same math? And those are questions that are easily addressed when you've got a mathematics. Harder if you're buried in jargon and concepts and you know, neurotransmitters and neurons and genes and all of that stuff. A lot harder to do mappings and move up and down the scale and to see connections across different things. But me personally, you know, I read way more literature than I do science, and that's always been much more useful for understanding consciousness. I talk to conscious researchers sometimes, and they just have idiotic ideas about people's nature at the most fundamental level. Like it's clear they just don't know people at all, and like how it frustrates me seeing people that talk about consciousness, but they don't really know everyday human, how an ordinary person views their own consciousness. You know, for them, it's only technical and abstract and scholarly, and you can't. There's a reason they didn't get anywhere with that. I mean, same with Dennett. I mean, the shocking thing about Dennett is he is in the humanities in philosophy, and yet he, I guess, because he wanted to be taken seriously by the scientists, you know, he resisted. You know, generally resists more like loosey-goosey humanitarian things from the humanities, but you know, would have done him better, I think.
Yeah, I guess there's definitely a reinforcing feedback loop there to some extent, right? If the scientists have the authority in this civilization, then of course you want to try to express your ideas about consciousness and humanity through those channels in order to be taken seriously.
I know that the original goal of this conversation was to talk about Intex, and we have made it a long way down that road. And
I certainly wasn't expecting to talk about sex.
I mean, I've been meaning actually to talk to you about that book, because when you sent us the sample chapters of Large Gods for Small Children, you had a little bit about the process of writing in there.
And we're really trying to tie sex to paranormal extraterrestrial experiences, because we're trying to do this exhibit right now.
Exactly.
And so we're trying to suss out the connections there.
And so in the last, because we have about half an hour before I gotta jet, because I gotta go to class, but I wonder.
Need to go in 15 minutes. So.
Oh, you have to go in 15? Okay.
Yeah, maybe 20 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. So I wonder for the last little bit if we can dig into the experiences with Intex, and the frame through which Shilo and I always talk about it when we're not in conversation with you is the only frame that we can put it into context, which is the frame of a psychedelic experience.
Or religious.
Yeah. Or a religious experience, like with Diana Pasulka. But I get the feeling that for you, it's a very, very distinct frame, and you don't place it in the same category as that.
No, not remotely. No, not anymore. Maybe when I was a teenager and it was first happening. Yeah, that's I might have been, but it's very different now. Yes. Yeah,
and so I wonder if you can you talk about the transition from seeing it that way to seeing it as something as distinctly extraterrestrial that doesn't belong in either one of those bins?
Well, first, I should say that I've been communicating with these beings for more than 30 years, and that's evolved. The way I communicate and kind of the whole thing has changed and evolved over time. The most important thing I always say about this is it's possible to learn about them. It's just like anything else in reality. It's never been static. It's not the same thing. I learned, I changed, I tried different approaches. They changed in their reaction to me. And where I am now is very different. Where I am now, so I had a kind of a climactic, my life was leading up to a big experience. Early on, an Intex told me there's a place called Rainbow Black, and said if I get there, I'll learn who I am, and it will transform me. And most of my life, I was trying to figure out: is this real? Is this hallucination? Is this a schizoid fantasy? What is this? It didn't seem possible. And then, relatively recently, starting about 10 or 15 years ago, I started taking it very seriously for a few reasons. But anyway, I did find it. I got there, and it changed me completely. It was an Intex experience of a different kind than I had ever had before. And now my relationship to reality and the universe is very different. I'm living every day what I used to only experience inside the Intex encounters. Like now all the time, it's just past the edge of that Intex is there, and I can pull them in. It's hard to describe. I don't need to go into a separate spiritual experience. My whole existence now is a spiritual experience. There's no separation any longer between my daily life and these Intex experiences. But this is very new. Only in the past 2 or 3 years has this happened.
What happened that drove you to take it much more seriously?
So the biggest single kind of like change in all of this was Stephen Grossberg getting to Boston University and finding Stephen Gross mathematics. That was the first time I suddenly thought, holy cow, I might actually be able to explain all this in scientific mathematical terms that other humans can understand. So kind of until that point, I thought this was my own private thing. I had been trying to show it to people and bring people in, but I wasn't viewing it scientifically. Like I wasn't going at it. I'm going to figure out the math behind all of these details. I'm going to relate this to physics. I was just, this is amazing. This is incredible. This is mind-blowing stuff. But once I started studying in the cognitive and neural systems program at Boston University under Steve Grossberg, the math was matching what I was getting from Intex. It was math that wasn't anywhere else. I mean, Steve's math is ahead of everybody else on Earth by a mile, by a long shot, even now. And it was like, that's the math that I'm seeing in the visions. Now Steve's math is as extensive as it is, however, it still doesn't cover everything that Intex was sharing with me. So Intex was sharing with even more. But now that I had that, it was like an anchor. Now I could build. Like now I could just keep building out anything that was happening to me with Intex. I could relate to Steve's math, and then build out and build up on that. I mean, Journey of the Mind that I wrote with Saigon was an extension of Steve. That's not just a regurgitation of Steve. Like maybe half of it in Steve and then half of it's new stuff that reflects things that Intex had shared with me. But I've already forgotten the question. What was the question?
The question was, it sounded like you were saying that there was this substantive event that happened 10 to 15 years ago that caused you to start taking it more seriously.
Once I had this changeover into viewing all of this mathematically, and I realized math could tie all of my experiences together. And that was the thing. Like then I thought, well, if this is real, if the math they're sharing with me is actually the math of consciousness, then maybe Rainbow Black's real too. Maybe Rainbow Black can be explained mathematically too in the same framework in some way. So then I started tackling it. Okay, what is Rainbow Black mathematically? What could it be? How could I find it? What would it? The significance? I was also communicating with Intex, so it wasn't just me sitting on a chair scratching my head. I do bring questions to Intex. Sometimes they respond and sometimes they don't. Sometimes something comes out of it and sometimes they don't. Rainbow Black, they were always very cagey about Rainbow Black. There's one Intex, not all of them. There's one Intex that communicated with me about Rainbow Black. It was always very cagey about it for unknown reason. Now I understand. Now that I've been there, I understand exactly why I was behaving. You got to find it on your own. That's the whole game. It's for any mind at our level, any we're module minds and a super mind, any minds at our level in the universe can access Rainbow Black. It's designed for us. It fits minds like ours.
You've talked about this before, though, and you too have been cagey about it. Can you put it into words? Like, what is this?
I'd rather be in the book. I wouldn't do it justice with words. I can barely do it literary justice, but I'm better at writing than talking, and it's so huge and important, and amazing and incredible.
It sounds a lot like the shamanic traditions of the past, where somebody goes into this other world and asks the spirits questions and gets answers and brings them back to the people. Do you think that it's unfair to make that? Surely this must have happened to other people in the past before you.
I don't know if it's happened to other humans, and I desperately want to know. I mean, that's a big reason I'm writing Large Gods for Small Children. I'm hoping to hear from others. In Rainbow Black, I encountered a lot of other individual minds on our level. Like, I mostly interact with Intex that call themselves 5 and 3 of these are axiomized minds. They're like gods. They're remote from our understanding. But in Rainbow Black, it was others like us, other minds at our level. And there weren't any humans, but that doesn't mean anything, to be honest. So,
I mean, are you familiar with the DMT research at all? Because it seems really congruent.
Is that the psychedelic, the 30-minute psychedelic drug?
It's 30-minute. I mean, there's a more extended form that the indigenous Amazonian people practice, which they pair it with a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, so it's extended in this brew that they make. But I was reading some literature about DMT experiences recently, and some overwhelming majority of the people that took the drug experienced contact with entities, which they described variably as humanoid, but not really necessarily humans. And it just seems... The other thing that's interesting about this is that DMT is a naturally occurring compound within the body. Like so people like Jacques Vallée have asserted that perhaps the root of a lot of the religious experiences and abduction experiences are by some anomalous natural release of this compound inside of the body.
So I would ask, in context of that, are there weird geometries that are associated with the Maze of Souls or Rainbow Black or Intex?
The Maze of Souls is definitely weird geometries. Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
And
it's
that's
all
also
geometric in
a
there.
hallmark
Well,
of
so,
the DMT
I'm
experience.
specifically thinking of these like hexagonal structures and things being like patterned in specific shapes. Is that a thing that happens?
Not hexonic.
I'm sure
Hexagons
the
haven't been
hexagon's important
dominant
too.
in anything I experienced. No,
I've never read that
but
in the DMT experiences.
Interesting.
But
There's
definitely geometric tiling.
geometric
geometric
tiling.
stuff for sure. There's the strong sense of geometry,
It just
powerful
sounds so
in the
much
Maze
like a
of Souls.
DMT experience to me. I've never had a DMT experience, but just from my reads of the literature,
It's the most academic thing that I've ever heard you say. From my reading of the literature. I mean, I think that is interesting because my thought was going to be like, okay, well, is there some way to put you in an MRI and study what happens inside your brain as this is happening, or to do like a spinal tap to see what chemicals your brain are releasing? That's a very lab
I
rat
don't think
thing to
those are the
ask of you.
levels. So I don't think that. I'm certainly not opposed, and I too have thought about stuff like that. But I just over time, I don't think there's a lot of reasons I don't think that would ever show anything, and I think that's the wrong way to go about it anyway. I'm not dodging it. I would do it. I could explain why. It's just there's a lot of boring reasons why I don't think that would show up anything. Even if absolutely everything I'm saying is utterly true in the way I'm describing it, that would not show up on an MRI necessarily.
yeah, they haven't been able to detect DMT in humans very well. Like they've
Yeah.
chopped up rodent brains when they die and stuff, but they can't.
Brain imaging is super crude and silly. Like you can see almost nothing in it. There's so much overhyping about what brain imaging gives you. So that's a big piece of. That's not the whole thing, but just brain imaging just doesn't have the granularity. It's not even just the granularity. You're not looking at the right things. Like it's focused on things. You need dynamics. You need to see it's flowing from here to here and here to there. Like it's snapshots. It's just here's where there's more activity here, and then there's some activity here. That's not how the mind operates. It's the wrong model. It's the wrong data.
And
It gets you thinking in the wrong ways.
And I guess that's the question though, which is, so are you interested in understanding the process by which this happens, or is it more something?
I've got a sense of how Intex technology works now. So I think what's happening is, may briefly explain consciousness. I've explained it on your show before, but maybe a listener hasn't heard it. So very quickly, consciousness does many things, but the single biggest thing consciousness does in our minds is manage attention. We have a massively complicated brain with 4 different levels of thinking going on, hierarchical levels of thinking going on simultaneously, 86 billion neurons, each neuron's doing its own thing. Everything in the brain's paying attention to different things at the same time. Everything's working at the same time, paying attention to different things. How do you get the entire brain, all these circuits, all these dynamics in a moment to snap and all focus on the same thing at the same time without a centralized decider? There's not a module that's in charge of this. This just happens from the holistic design of the brain. What is that? Consciousness is the dynamic. Consciousness is the activity that manages attention across the whole brain. How does it do it? We have a modular level of neural activity. Our modules are like a visual object recognition module. I call it the visual what module. We can that module is in charge of identifying objects from visual. There's an audio object recognition module that identifies what an object is from the sound of it. That's a snap. So each of these modules is capable of producing consciousness on its own, and it does so by resonance. We have a conscious experience whenever there's a physical dynamic of resonance in one of our modules, one or more of our modules. And it's what's resonating exactly when we have a conscious experience? The facts on the ground, the actual input is resonating with our expectation, our prediction, our guess of what's going to happen. So we think this is going to happen. If what we think is going to happen matches what's actually happening, they resonate. Expectation and fact resonate, and we are conscious. The resonance is the physical embodiment of a conscious experience. That's not all. Our minds operate on a consciousness cartel. Each of our consciousness modules at any given moment is focused on something different. I'm looking at you guys, but I can hear some trucks over there. My module's processing the trucks. My eyes are processing you guys. Who's going to win control of my consciousness? Because we're only conscious of one thing at one time. They compete and try to extend the resonance across all the modules. So I'm looking at you guys. So all of my modules are resonating. My audio module is resonating, my visual module, my targeting module, as I move my finger, it's all focused on the same thing. We're all resonating together on the stimulus of you guys in front of me. So that's how consciousness works. What I think Intex technology is doing, I think somehow they are adding another resonance. They're basically creating an artificial module that's resonating with my conscious cartel. Why do I think this is the case? First of all, they suggested, when I asked them, they suggested I pitched this to them and they said, correct. That's not exactly how the conversation went, but that was the outcome. I think what's happening is somehow they're creating a resonance. They're getting a resonance with my consciousness cartel, because when it happens, it feels like a new dimension to my mind. It feels like some new thing that was never there before, some new perception, some new conception. It's human. Like it feels like it's like hearing, but it's not like hearing. It's like vision, but it's not like, it's like it's like suddenly being able to be sensitive to magnetism. Suddenly, oh my God, there's a magnetic field. How can I sense that? It feels like that. And when I was younger, it took a long time to calibrate. Like it was a lot rougher. And what I think the Maze of Souls was, I think the Maze of Souls was the subjective experience when I was not aligned with the resonance. That as long as I was not perfectly aligned with the resonance, I experienced this Maze of Souls, these corridors, these portals. And if I got through a portal into a room, that's when, so the Maze of Souls is endless corridors, endless doors, and you go through a door and you're another corridor. The corridors are curving, they're up and down. It's like a nest of corridors. But once in a while, I'd go through a portal and it would be a room, and then I'd interact with five. Let's say if I would be there, there'd be a temple to five, or whatever the case would be. And then I'd have communication. I think that when the resonance wasn't completely locked in, I experienced it as this Maze of Souls, and then when it locks in, then I can communicate. And another reason I think that is I've gotten better at it. Like I can feel it starting, and then I can do the things I need to do to resonate with it, and then have it come over my mind. So I don't really need to go into the Maze of, I don't go into the Maze of Souls. I haven't been in the Maze of Souls in 20 years. The only time I've been in the Maze of Souls in the past 20 years is when I got to Rainbow Black. It was a very unique, unusual, extraordinary thing. I thought I was never going back to the Maze of Souls. I did, but there's a good reason. I understand why why that happened. But but ultimately, I think it's resonating with my consciousness cartel, because it's experienced as it's part of me, but not part of me. It's like a new dimension, a new conception. Yeah, a new sense when it's happening, or multiple senses. Sometimes it's more than one.
Immediately, as you're describing this, I'm thinking about something to do with transcranial magnetic stimulation, and wondering if there's some sort of resonance that can be externally set up in the brain that would trigger the experience, if it was possible to actually map what that resonance is. And then the second thing that I immediately think of is hypnosis. Because what you're saying of tuning to the right place and to the right state, I wonder if working with a hypnotist, you couldn't help other people.
Hypnotism is more about suggestibility. I would have my doubts about that. I don't really know, but your other suggestion about the transcranial measure. So I think there's a way that I can help other people communicate with Intex too, using this idea. But I think I can do it through music. The transcranial TMI stuff is similar, I think. But I think this is one reason I wrote This Is What It Sounds Like with Susan Rogers. I just wrote a book with Susan Rogers. She was Prince's engineer. She became the first successful female record producer in modern times, had a #1 hit herself. We wrote a book together called This Is What It Sounds Like. But in it, I explain how music consciousness works. I wrote this for a few reasons. One is because I understood consciousness. I felt if I understood consciousness, I should be able to explain things like, how does music work in the brain? And I can't explain it. I do, and this is what it sounds like. But I was also interested in understanding it, because I thought it should be possible, if this is true, this resonance technology idea, and again, Intex strongly suggested that's the case, then it should be possible to recreate it using other waveforms. And I think there should be a way to do it with audio, with music. Yeah. And I'm working on it.
We should
I'm working on a device, a musical device to help people contact extraterrestrials.
Oh, that's amazing.
Cool.
That's amazing. Sign me up. Sign me up. I will be first in line for said music. Yeah, absolutely. It's going to become a
Early
musical
stages,
arms race.
but I'm very serious about
That's really
this is
cool.
going to be like my next major. I want to write these books, but that's my next major project is going to be working on this.
That's fantastic.
All right, I'm looking forward to that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we never finished the conversation, but I know you gotta go. So let's just plan to have you come back in another, I don't know, couple weeks, couple months.
Yeah,
I love the way that your brain works. I love how much is
I
in
love
there.
I love your show. I love everything you guys are doing. It's so much fun. We ended up talking about sex for an hour. That was that was not at all what I thought we would be talking about. So that's lovely.
Thanks for coming by, man.
Yeah, it's great talking to you guys. Always so fun.
All right, we'll see you down the line then.
Yep.